Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've been meaning to write this down for so long, but honestly, I've been too freaked out to even think about it. What happened to us in September 2018 completely changed how my son and I live in our home. I'm still not comfortable being outside after dark, and I doubt I ever will be again. We live outside Santee, South Carolina, in a small house on about 2 acres of land. It's mostly cleared around the house, but there's woods that start about 100 yards behind us. We've always loved it here. Peaceful, private, good neighbors, but not too close. My son Jake, not his real name, was 16 at the time, and we had 3 small dogs, a Chihuahua mix, a Yorkie, and a Maltese. They were our little alarm system. Seriously, they'd bark if a leaf blew across the yard. September 12th was when it started. Jake's always been a night owl, especially since starting homeschooling. That night, he was up playing video games in his room, which faces the backyard. His window is about 4 feet off the ground. Around 2 in the morning, he heard something weird outside his window. At first, he thought it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or possum. But then he heard what he described as metal scraping on wood. It was a slow, deliberate sound. Then came the breathing, heavy, rhythmic breathing, followed by these low grunts. Jake told me later they sounded like a buck snorting, but much deeper, more guttural. The weird thing, and this should have been our first real warning, was that our dogs didn't make a sound. These dogs bark at the mailman from a quarter-mile away. But that night, nothing. Jake said they just huddled together on the couch, completely still, staring at the hallway that leads to his room. Jake was too scared to look out the window. He grabbed his phone and a baseball bat and tiptoed to the living room, where he spent the rest of the night on the couch with the lights on. He texted me, "But I'm a heavy sleeper and didn't see it till morning." When I woke up, Jake looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, jumpy. He told me what happened, and I'll admit I was skeptical at first. I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep playing his games and had a nightmare. But then we went outside to check. The screen on Jake's window was bent at the corner, pushed inward. The grass beneath his window was flattened, like something heavy had been standing there. Not just standing, shifting its weight back and forth based on how the grass was pressed down in different directions. There were no distinct footprints, just this compressed area about 3 feet wide. I called the sheriff's department, but they weren't much help. The deputy suggested it might be teenagers messing around or maybe a bear, though bears aren't common in our immediate area. He checked around the property, but didn't find anything concerning, just told us to call back if anything else happened. 2 days later, I got home from work and noticed the door to our storage trailer was wide open. This trailer sits about 20 yards from the house, and we keep lawn equipment and holiday decorations in it. The door is heavy metal and has to be lifted to open. We always secure it with this thick metal wedge that slides through the latch. That wedge was on the ground, bent slightly. Nothing was missing from the trailer, but things were moved around inside, not ransacked, just shifted, like something had been looking through our stuff. Again, I called the sheriff. Again, they found nothing. What really freaks me out is thinking about the strength it would take to bend that metal wedge. It's not something a person could easily do without tools. For the next week, we were on edge. I started coming home for lunch to check on Jake. We made sure all doors and windows were locked at all times. I even bought a motion-activated floodlight for the backyard, but I hadn't installed it yet. Then came the night of September 21st. Jake had fallen asleep early, around 10, which was unusual for him. Around midnight, he woke up suddenly. He said later he felt like someone was watching him. When he opened his eyes, he saw a face pressed against his window glass. The way he described it still makes my skin crawl. Yellow eyes, glowing slightly in the reflection of our porch light, set deep under a heavy brow ridge. The nose was wide and flat, but the worst part was the mouth, lips pulled back in what looked like a snarl, revealing teeth that were long and wide, not pointed like a predator's, but definitely not human either. The thing made a low growling sound, and Jake said he could see its breath fogging the glass. Each breath was raspy and wet, and it actually rattled the window slightly. Jake screamed and ran from his room. I woke up to his screaming and found him in the hallway, white as a sheet and shaking. I grabbed my gun from the safe and checked the house, while Jake huddled with the dogs in my room. By the time I got the courage to look out his window, whatever it was had gone, but there was a foggy patch on the glass where something had breathed on it, and smeared in that condensation were what looked like finger marks, wide, with no clear fingerprints, just smudges. We spent the rest of the night in the living room with all the lights on, the dogs still eerily quiet. At first light, I went outside with my gun and checked around. The grass under Jake's window was flattened again, worse than before. There was a musky smell in the air, like wet dog combined with dirty hay, and something else I can't describe, something rank and wild. I found broken branches on the ground that hadn't been there the day before. Some were snapped, not cut, and they'd come from about 10 feet up our maple tree. What could reach that high and snap branches that thick? That day, we went into full security mode. I installed the motion lights, put screws in all the windows so they couldn't be opened from outside, and added new deadbolts to the doors. Jake moved into my room temporarily, sleeping on an air mattress. For the next week or so, strange things kept happening. The dogs would pace at night but never bark. We'd find branches or stones arranged in unnatural patterns in the yard. Sometimes we'd wake up to that strong, musky smell, even with all windows closed. One morning, I found what looked like a large handprint on my car, about twice the size of my hand, with no clear fingerprints, just a dusty outline on the hood. I never saw it directly, not like Jake did, but I know what it was. When I was 15, I saw something in these same woods while camping with friends. Wide shoulders, dark fur, fiery eyes in the darkness. I'd convinced myself over the years it was just a bear, my teenage imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew better, and now it had come to my home, to my son's window. Some nights I still wake up thinking I hear that metal on wood sound, or that deep, guttural breathing. Jake's back in his own room now, but he keeps his blinds closed tight and rarely opens his window, even on nice days. The dogs still act strange sometimes. They'll all suddenly stop what they're doing and stare at the back door, or they'll refuse to go into certain parts of the yard. I think whatever it was, and I believe it was a Bigfoot, though I never thought I'd say those words seriously, was curious about us, maybe attracted by our trash or just passing through its territory. I believe it was warning Jake to stay inside, to stay away from the windows at night. We still live here. Moving wasn't financially possible, and honestly, where would we go? These creatures are reported all over the country. But we've changed how we live. We don't go outside after dark. We keep our trash in sealed containers in the garage until collection day. We've planted thorny bushes under all the windows. The visits seem to stop after we increase security, but sometimes, especially on quiet nights, I swear I can hear something moving in the woods behind our house. Something big, something deliberate. And on those nights, our 3 little dogs, who bark at everything from squirrels to the wind, huddled together in complete silence. I don't know why it came to us, or if it will come back. But I do know this. There are things in these woods that science hasn't explained, things that have been here longer than us, and sometimes they get curious about what we're doing in their territory. Sometimes they come up to our windows and look inside, and when they do, all you can do is hope they're just curious and not hungry. That night changed me. I used to love sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset. Now I'm inside before dusk, doors locked, blinds drawn. Jake won't admit it, but I know he sleeps with a baseball bat next to his bed. And sometimes, when I'm driving home late and my headlights sweep across the edge of the woods, I slow down and look carefully at the tree line, half expecting to see yellow eyes reflecting back at me. Story 2. I still feel my palms get sweaty when I drive down that stretch of road outside Blakely. It's been over 20 years, but the memory is burned into my brain like it happened yesterday. I was 16 back in 2001, just got my license that summer and was always looking for excuses to drive my dad's old Ford F-150. That truck was a beast. Sat about 6 feet high on its four-wheel drive chassis, forest green with a few rust spots, but ran like a dream. It happened on a Friday night in late October. The weather had finally cooled down from Georgia's brutal summer heat. My older brother Tyler and his best friend Caleb had been hanging out at our place all evening, playing video games and just wasting time like teenagers do. Around 11:30, Caleb needed to get home, and I jumped at the chance to drive him. "I can take him," I offered, probably too eagerly. Dad had already gone to bed, but had told me earlier I could use the truck if needed. He trusted me with it, even though I hadn't had my license long. The drive to Caleb's place wasn't far, maybe 3 or 4 miles down these winding gravel roads that cut through farmland and dense pine forests. I knew that route like the back of my hand. Grew up riding my bike down those roads, knew every pothole and curve. Tyler decided to come along for the ride. The 3 of us piled into the truck cab, with Caleb squeezed in the middle of the bench seat. It was a clear night, but pitch black out there in the countryside. No streetlights, no moon that night. Just endless darkness beyond the reach of the headlights. We were talking about some stupid horror movie we'd all seen recently. I remember Tyler was saying how fake the special effects looked, and Caleb was defending it. Normal teenage stuff. The truck's old heater was blasting warm air, and the radio was playing softly in the background. The gravel crunched under the tires as we took the turns. There's this one section where the road gets really twisty for about half a mile before straightening out again near Caleb's house. I slowed down a bit for those turns. Not because I was a particularly careful driver, but because my dad would kill me if I messed up his truck. We were just coming around that final bend before Caleb's place. The headlights swung across the road as we turned, and then there it was. Standing right at the edge of the road, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. This figure. It was just standing there, motionless. Taller than the truck, way taller. Had to be at least 7 feet high, maybe more. Broad shoulders, thick build. The headlights caught it perfectly for that split second, illuminating this light brown, thick hair all over its body. I didn't even have time to hit the brakes before it moved. And how it moved. That's what still haunts me. This thing dropped down into the roadside ditch in one fluid motion, and then, I swear on everything I believe in, it used one leg to propel itself completely over a 4-foot barbed wire fence. Just cleared it like it was nothing. A fence designed to keep cattle in, and this thing just sailed over it with a single bound. The way it moved wasn't human, not even close. The balance, the power, the speed, nothing that big should be able to move that gracefully. It never made a sound, never looked directly at us. Just this incredibly powerful, controlled movement, and then it was gone into the darkness beyond the fence. For what felt like forever, but was probably just 5 or 6 seconds, none of us said a word. I had slowed the truck almost to a stop without even realizing it. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Did you see that?" Caleb finally whispered, leaning forward and staring out the windshield into the darkness. I could only nod. My mouth had gone completely dry. What the hell was that? Tyler's voice cracked slightly. I pressed the gas pedal again, moving forward slowly. "I don't know." We drove the last quarter mile to Caleb's house in complete silence. When we pulled into his driveway, none of us moved for a moment. "That wasn't a person," Caleb finally said. "No way that was a person." "Too big," I agreed. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. "And no human can jump like that." "You think it was a bear," Tyler suggested, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe that himself. I shook my head. Bears don't stand like that, and they don't move like that either. I've lived here my whole life, Caleb said. Never seen anything like that in these woods. We sat there for another minute, each trying to make sense of what we'd witnessed. Finally, Caleb opened the door. "Thanks for the ride," he said, trying to sound normal but failing. "See you guys Monday." "Lock your doors," Tyler called after him, only half joking. After Caleb went inside, Tyler and I rode home in silence for the first mile or so. The truck's headlights seemed weaker somehow, not penetrating the darkness as well as they had before. "We should tell Dad," Tyler finally said. "And say what? That we saw some giant hairy thing jump over a fence? He'll think we're making it up." "Jason, that thing was real." Tyler rarely used my name like that. That wasn't normal. "I know," I said quietly. "But what could it have been?" We tossed theories back and forth for the rest of the ride home. An escaped zoo animal? Some guy on stilts playing a prank? Each explanation sounded more ridiculous than the last. None fit what we'd seen. I've lived in rural Georgia my entire life. I know what deer look like in the dark. I know what bears look like. Hell, there were even rumors of panthers in the area that people spotted occasionally, but this was something completely different. The way it stood, perfectly upright on two legs. The proportions were all wrong for any animal I'd ever seen. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those few seconds in my mind. The way it moved haunted me. That impossible leap. The power in that single leg pushing off the ground. No sound when it landed. No rustling in the underbrush. Just there one moment and gone the next. The next morning at breakfast I almost brought it up to my parents. But what would I say? The words sounded crazy even in my head. Tyler caught my eye across the table and gave a slight shake of his head. We silently agreed to keep it to ourselves. On Monday at school, Caleb pulled me aside between classes. I told my dad, he admitted, about what we saw. "What did he say?" I asked, both curious and nervous. He got real quiet, asked me exactly where we were on the road. Then he told me a story about his hunting buddy, who saw something similar back in 1985, not far from the same spot. A chill ran down my spine. Did he think it was I couldn't bring myself to say the word. He didn't say. Just told me to be careful in the woods, especially after dark. Over the next few weeks, we did some research at the school library. This was before everyone had the internet at home, so we were flipping through books and old newspaper clippings. We found a few vague reports from the area over the years, strange sightings, unexplained noises in the woods, livestock acting spooked for no apparent reason, but nothing concrete. Nothing that could definitively explain what we saw that night. We never went looking for it. That might seem strange to some people, but the truth is, we were scared. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't something we wanted to encounter again, especially not on purpose. The power it displayed, the unnatural way it moved, something deep inside told me to stay away. I still drive that road sometimes when I visit my parents. Even after all these years, I slow down at that bend. My eyes scan the roadside ditches, the fence line, the dark spaces between the pine trees. Sometimes I think I see movement in my peripheral vision, but when I turn to look, there's never anything there. What bothers me most isn't just what we saw. It's that I don't have an explanation. I've run through every possibility in my mind thousands of times. No normal animal moves the way that thing did. No human could have cleared that fence with that kind of effortless power. I never reported it officially. Who would I tell? What would I say? I saw a Bigfoot. I'd be laughed out of town, but I know what I saw. Tyler knows. Caleb knows. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through those pine forests at night. I wonder if others have seen it too, but like me, kept quiet out of fear of ridicule. How many encounters go unreported because people are afraid to speak up? That brief encounter changed something in me. I used to think I understood the world around me, knew what was possible and what wasn't. Now, I'm not so sure. There are things out there that don't fit neatly into the categories we've created. 20+ years later, and I still check my rearview mirror when I'm driving down dark country roads. I still tense up when I hear unexplained noises outside at night, and I still see it in my dreams sometimes, that fluid, powerful movement as it cleared the fence in a single bound. I don't know what it was. I can't explain it. But I know what I saw that night outside Blakely wasn't from the world as I understood it, and that's the scariest part. Knowing that there are things out there beyond our understanding, moving through the darkness just beyond the reach of our headlights. Story 3. I've been holding this story in for a long time. I'm not exactly sure why I'm sharing it now, but I still think about that night almost every day, and maybe writing it out will help me process it. This happened back in September 2009 when I was 19. I lived just outside Sultan, Washington at the time. Small town, heavily wooded area, pretty isolated in spots. My best friend Jake and I were bored that night. It was a Friday, and we had nothing to do. Sultan isn't exactly party central, especially when you're 19 and can't hit the bars. It was one of those perfect early fall nights. Cool, but not cold, with this incredible full moon lighting up everything. Jake suggested we go check out the old Pioneer Cemetery at the edge of town. Now, I know hanging out in a cemetery at night sounds like typical teenage stuff, but we weren't there to vandalize or anything stupid. The place was peaceful, and the moonlight made it beautiful in a weird way. The gravestones were super old, some from the late 1800s, and we'd go there sometimes just to chill and talk. We got there around 9:30 or so. The cemetery isn't big, maybe the size of a couple basketball courts. It's surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides, with a ridge that slopes up on the western edge, behind a line of massive cedar trees. There's this old stone bench near the middle that we usually sat on. The moonlight was so bright that night we didn't even need flashlights. We could see everything clearly. The weathered headstones, the cedar trees swaying slightly in the breeze, the old barbed wire fence that ran along the perimeter. We were just sitting there talking about nothing important. Video games, girls, the usual stuff. I remember checking the time on my phone. It was 10:15 when I first heard it. Something moving down the ridge behind the tree line on the west side. At first, I didn't think much of it. We have deer everywhere around here, and they're always rustling through the underbrush, but this was different. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate. When deer move, they kind of dart and pause, dart and pause. This was steady, methodical. Something big was walking down that hill, crushing leaves and snapping sticks under its weight. I nudged Jake. "You hear that?" He stopped mid-sentence and listened. His eyes widened a bit, and he nodded. The footsteps got closer to the fence line. Then we heard breathing, deep, heavy breathing that reminded me of when my uncle's draft horses would breathe after pulling logs. That's when I started getting genuinely scared. Whatever was making those sounds was huge. I whispered to Jake, "Should we go?" But before he could answer, it stepped into view. I'll never forget this moment as long as I live. This figure emerged from between 2 cedar trees into a patch of moonlight. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A really tall guy in a coat, maybe. But no, what I was seeing wasn't human, not even close. It was massive. I'm 6 foot, and this thing towered over what a person should be. It was covered in shaggy hair that looked silvery white in the moonlight. Not like fur exactly, more like long human hair, but all over its body. The shoulders were impossibly wide, and its arms, God, its arms hung down almost to its knees. The proportions were all wrong for a human. We froze completely. I couldn't even breathe. The thing walked directly up to the barbed wire fence that separated the cemetery from the woods, 4 feet high at least, and then it just stepped over it like it was nothing. Didn't climb, didn't jump. Just lifted one long leg and stepped right over, barely breaking stride. It walked into the cemetery proper then, moving toward the largest cedar tree. There's this one enormous cedar in the northeast corner that I'd climbed once before. I knew there was a branch about 9 feet up that I could just barely reach by jumping. This thing's head was nearly at that branch level. I'd estimate it was at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. For a few seconds, it didn't seem to notice us. It was focused on something else, moving with purpose. Then it stopped suddenly and turned its head toward us. I'll never forget the eyes. They caught the moonlight and seemed to reflect it, like a cat's eyes, but bigger. It locked its gaze directly on us. My heart felt like it was going to explode. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Jake was trembling beside me. I could feel the bench shaking. We were completely exposed in the open with nowhere to run. The thing stared at us for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. Then it changed direction and started walking directly across the cemetery. Not running, but moving with more urgency now, its pace increasing. It was heading toward the opposite fence line, away from us, but also away from where it had entered. It crossed the entire cemetery in maybe 10 long strides. When it reached the eastern fence, it did the same thing. Just stepped right over the barbed wire without breaking stride. Then it disappeared into the trees on the other side. The sounds that followed were intense, crashing through underbrush, snapping branches, the sound of something large moving quickly through dense woods. The noise continued for maybe 30 seconds, getting fainter as whatever it was moved away. Neither of us spoke for at least a minute after the sounds faded. Jake finally broke the silence. "What the fuck was that?" he whispered. I couldn't answer. My mouth was bone dry. My legs felt like jelly when I finally stood up. Without discussing it, we both started backing toward the cemetery entrance, never taking our eyes off the tree line where the thing had disappeared. When we reached my truck, we jumped in and I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the ignition. We didn't talk much on the ride back to town. What could we say? Nothing in our experience had prepared us for what we'd just seen. When I dropped Jake off, he just said, "Don't tell anyone about this, okay? They'll think we're crazy." I agreed, but the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I needed to know if anyone else had seen something similar. I started casually bringing up local legends with some of the older folks around Sultan and neighboring Gold Bar. I didn't mention what we'd seen, just asked if they'd ever heard of anything strange in the woods. And man, the stories I collected over the next few months were eye-opening. An old logger told me about finding huge human-like footprints in snow up in the remote mountains near Bering. A woman who'd lived near Spada Lake for 40 years described hearing wood knocks in patterns that couldn't be explained. 2 different people mentioned seeing large white figures crossing roads near Index late at night. The most convincing was Mr. Erickson, who'd farmed outside Gold Bar since the 60s. He described losing chickens to something that would tear off entire sections of wire fencing. He'd seen a shadowy figure near his barn one night that was too big to be a man, too manlike to be a bear. He'd fired a warning shot with his shotgun, and the thing had disappeared into the woods, making sounds exactly like what we'd heard. The more stories I collected, the more I became convinced of what we'd seen. I never used the name Bigfoot when talking to people. That seemed too ridiculous, too pop culture. But that's what it was. I know how that sounds. If someone had told me this story before that night, I'd have thought they were full of shit or hallucinating. But I know what I saw. I never told Jake about my research. He wanted to pretend it never happened. We hung out less and less after that night, and by the next summer, we drifted apart completely. Last I heard, he moved to Seattle and never comes back to Sultan. I still live in the same area. I never saw the creature again, but there have been moments, times when I'm outside after dark and I'll hear heavy footsteps moving through the brush on the ridge behind my house. I'll catch a whiff of something musky and wild on the breeze. I'll find broken branches too high up to be explained by deer or bear. It's changed how I see these woods. I know there's something out there that science hasn't explained, something that's managed to stay hidden despite everything. Sometimes I'll be driving the back roads at night, and I'll slow down near certain stretches of forest, scanning the tree line. Part of me hopes I'll see it again, just to confirm I'm not crazy. Part of me hopes I never do. The weirdest thing is how normal life just continues. I go to work, pay bills, watch TV, all while carrying this knowledge that most people would laugh at. Sometimes I almost convince myself it was just a bear walking upright or some other explanation. Then I remember those eyes looking directly into mine, the impossible proportions, the way it stepped over that fence without effort. I don't know what to do with this experience. I don't talk about it anymore. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw that night in the cemetery, and I know I'm not alone in seeing it. There are others around here with similar stories, spoken in hushed tones on porches and in the backs of local diners. The forest feels different to me now, not necessarily threatening, just occupied. There's something intelligent out there, something that's watching us, even as we think we're alone. I still go hiking and camping, but I'm more alert now, more aware of my surroundings, and sometimes when I'm deep in the woods and it gets quiet, that special kind of quiet when even the birds stop singing, I get the distinct feeling I'm being observed. I still don't have answers about what exactly I saw that night. I probably never will, but I know it was real, and I know it's still out there, moving silently through these ancient forests, watching and waiting, just beyond the edge of our world, but somehow still part of it. Story 4. I've been debating whether to share this for 8 years now. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. Honestly, I wish what happened that day in May 2015 had never occurred at all. It completely changed my relationship with the outdoors, something that used to be my sanctuary. My wife Sarah and I had been riding ATVs in the Ouachita National Forest in Arkansas for years. We knew those trails like the back of our hands. It was our weekend escape, a way to blow off steam and reconnect with nature. I'd spent my entire life in those woods, hunting, fishing, hiking, you name it. Never once felt afraid out there. Not once. May 16th, 2015. The date is burned into my memory. It was unseasonably warm, around 85 degrees with barely a cloud in the sky. Perfect riding weather. The trails were dry and dusty after a week without rain. We'd packed our usual gear, water bottles, trail mix, a small first aid kit and our phones, though reception was always spotty at best out there. We were about 2 hours into our ride when it happened. We'd taken a less traveled trail that branched off from one of the main paths. It was overgrown, but still passable, winding through a section of older growth trees. The trail curved upward over a small rise, nothing steep, just enough of an incline that you couldn't see what was on the other side until you crested it. I was leading, with Sarah following about 15 feet behind me. As I reached the top of the rise, I saw what I initially thought was some kind of burnt tree stump about 50 yards ahead. It looked odd, dark black, with what appeared to be a white top. My first thought was maybe it was a dead tree that had been struck by lightning, with the top part bleached by the sun. I slowed down a bit, confused by what I was seeing. As we got closer, maybe 30 yards away now, something about the stump made my skin crawl. It moved, just slightly, but enough that I noticed. That's when I realized it wasn't a stump at all. The shape turned slightly, and I could make out the side of a head and a massive shoulder. It was trying to hide behind a thin tree. I mean really thin, maybe 8 to 10 inches wide at most. But whatever this thing was, it was enormous, and the tree concealed almost nothing of its bulk. My body went cold despite the heat. I hit the brakes so hard that my ATV skidded slightly on the dusty trail. Sarah pulled up beside me, asking what was wrong. I couldn't speak. I just pointed to our right, where this creature was standing. Sarah saw it and immediately started screaming. Not little yelps, but full-throated screams of pure terror. That broke my paralysis. I frantically tried to turn my ATV around while keeping my eyes on the thing. The trail was narrow, and my hands were shaking so badly I stalled the engine twice before getting it restarted. What I saw in those moments is burned into my brain. It was tall, unbelievably tall, standing between 8 and 9 feet. Its body was massive, with wide, powerful-looking shoulders and arms that hung down its sides. The arms were proportionally longer than a human's, with hands that seemed to reach down to its knees. Despite its size, it had a somewhat tapered waist, giving it an odd triangular shape. Its entire body was covered in shiny black hair, not matted or dirty like you might expect from a wild animal, but almost glossy, like it was well groomed. The hair wasn't super long, maybe 3 to 4 inches, and it covered everything except parts of the face. The head is what convinced me this wasn't a man in a suit or some other animal. It had that distinctive shape you see in the Patterson-Gimlin film. A sloped forehead that extended back into an elongated, somewhat pointed skull. Not pointed like a cone, but definitely not round like a human head. The face had less hair, revealing dark skin underneath. The eyes were set deep, dark, and they were aware. That's the only way I can describe it. They weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, and what looked like annoyance or anger. What struck me most was how it stood perfectly straight behind that skinny tree, as if it genuinely thought it was hidden from us. Like a child playing hide and seek who doesn't realize their entire body is visible. It made no move toward us, just remained frozen in that position. I finally got my ATV turned around and shouted at Sarah to follow me. We took off down the trail, the engines roaring. Sarah kept looking back, terrified it was following us. I was driving so fast that branches whipped at my arms, leaving scratches I wouldn't even notice until hours later. We didn't stop until we reached the main trail, and then we continued all the way back to our truck at the trailhead. Neither of us spoke during the ride. I don't think we could. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my hands didn't stop shaking even after we'd loaded the ATVs onto the trailer. Once we were inside the truck with the doors locked, Sarah burst into tears. I just sat there, keys in the ignition, unable to process what we'd seen. It was only when Sarah asked if we were going to call someone that I started the engine. Who would we call? I remember asking her. Who would believe us? The drive home was tense and quiet. We tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But no bear stands that tall or has that body shape. A person in a costume, out in the middle of nowhere, on a rarely used trail. And no costume could have that kind of fluid, natural movement or those proportions. That night, we barely slept. Every sound outside our house made us jump. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to find some explanation that made sense. But there wasn't one, except the explanation that seemed impossible. We had seen a Bigfoot, a real, living Sasquatch, observed in broad daylight from just 30 yards away. The next few weeks were difficult. I couldn't concentrate at work. I found myself researching Bigfoot sightings online, something I'd always scoffed at before. I discovered that the Ouachita Mountains have a long history of sightings dating back decades. Some of the descriptions matched exactly what we had seen. Sarah and I made a pact not to tell anyone. Who would believe us? We'd be laughed at, maybe even ostracized. Our families would think we were crazy. So we kept it to ourselves, this enormous secret that was changing our lives. About a month after the encounter, I tried to go hunting in a different part of the forest. I'd been an avid hunter since I was 12, but that day, I couldn't do it. Every shadow between the trees looked like it might be hiding something. Every snapped twig sounded like footsteps. I packed up and left after less than an hour, and I haven't been back hunting since. The thing that haunts me most isn't just what we saw, but the implications of it. If these creatures exist, and I'm now 100% certain they do, what else might be out there that we don't know about? How is it possible that something so large could remain hidden from science? And most troublingly, how many times had I been in the woods, completely unaware that I was being watched? I sometimes wonder if it was aware of us before we saw it. If maybe it had heard our ATVs approaching and tried to hide, not realizing how ineffective its concealment was. There was something almost innocent about that behavior, which makes the whole experience even more unsettling. It's been 8 years now Sarah and I sold our ATVs 6 months after the encounter. We haven't been back to that part of the forest or any remote wooded area since that day. I miss it sometimes, the freedom, the connection with nature, but the thought of going back makes my chest tight and my palms sweat. I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night, the image of that creature vivid in my mind. Its eyes, intelligent and seemingly annoyed at being discovered, the way it stood so still, as if hoping we wouldn't notice it despite its massive size, the shiny black hair that looked so clean and well kept. I don't know why I'm finally sharing this now. Maybe because enough time has passed that I can talk about it without my voice shaking. Maybe because I need someone else to know what's out there. All I know is that what we saw that day was real, and it fundamentally changed how I view the world. I used to feel at home in the woods. Now I know I was just a visitor in something else's territory. And sometimes, when I look out at the tree line from our backyard at dusk, I can't shake the feeling that something might be looking back. Story 5. I've been debating whether or not to share this for weeks now. I'm not the type of person who believes in monsters or anything supernatural, but what happened to me last month has me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world around us. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. It was September 14th, 2023. I remember the date clearly because it was my mum's birthday, and I was heading out to pick up her cake from the bakery downtown. It was around 5 in the evening, that time when the sun starts to get low, but it's still light out. I live in Sitka. It's a small town in Alaska where everyone knows everyone, and nothing really happens. I was backing out of my driveway, coffee in hand, looking over my shoulder to make sure I wasn't going to hit anything. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a person crossing the street. But as I focused, I realized whatever was standing in the middle of the road was far from human. This thing was massive. I'm talking at least 7 or 8 feet tall. It stood completely upright on 2 legs, but its proportions were all wrong. The arms hung down way past where they should, almost to its knees. But what really got me was the head. It had this weird cone shape to it, almost like it was pointed at the top. The whole body was covered in dark, matted fur. Not black exactly, more like a deep brownish black. I froze with my foot on the brake. My car was half out of the driveway, and I just sat there staring at this creature. It wasn't moving either. It just stood there in the middle of the road, looking right at me. I couldn't see its eyes clearly from that distance, but I could feel it watching me. There was intelligence there. This wasn't just some animal wandering through. It was observing me. After what felt like forever but was probably only a few seconds, it moved. It didn't run or scurry away like a startled animal. It deliberately turned its body and walked across the rest of the street on 2 legs. Then it pushed through the underbrush near Sawmill Creek and disappeared. I sat in my car for a good 5 minutes trying to process what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking so badly I had to put my coffee in the cup holder before I spilled it all over myself. I almost convinced myself I was seeing things. Maybe it was just a bear standing on its hind legs. But bears don't walk upright for that long, and the head shape was all wrong. A guy in a costume. But who would wander around Sitka in a bizarre fur suit? And why? I eventually got myself together enough to drive to the bakery, but I was distracted the whole time. When I got back home, I didn't tell anyone. It sounded too crazy, and I didn't want my family thinking I was losing it. But then weird shit started happening around the neighborhood. 3 days after my sighting, my dad came in from mowing the lawn looking pale. He said he'd seen a very large brownish black animal across the street. He thought it was a bear at first, but something about the way it moved bothered him. He said it was watching him from the tree line before it disappeared into the woods. My dad's not the type to get spooked easily. He's been hunting his whole life and knows the wildlife around here better than anyone. Then, Mrs. Peterson next door mentioned that her 8-year-old grandson had been refusing to play in her backyard. When she finally got him to tell her why, he said he'd seen a big gorilla standing by her shed. She laughed it off as a kid's imagination, but I got chills when she told me. About a week after my first sighting, I started hearing sounds at night. I've lived in Alaska my whole life. I know what bears sound like, what wolves sound like, what even mountain lions sound like. This wasn't any of those. It was this horrible mix between a scream, a howl, and a growl all at once. It would start low and then build to this pitch that made the hair on my arms stand up. And it was close, not off in the mountains, but right in the woods behind our neighborhood. The first time I heard it, I was taking out the trash around 10 at night. It was dark, with just the security light illuminating our backyard. The sound came from the direction of the creek, maybe 100 yards away. I dropped the trash bag and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. I stood there in my kitchen, heart pounding, listening. It called out 3 more times, each one making my stomach knot up tighter. Then the smell hit me. I had left the kitchen window cracked open, and this horrible stench wafted in. It was like wet dog mixed with mildew and something rotten. I slammed the window shut, but the smell had already permeated the room. I had to light candles to make it bearable. Over the next few days, I started noticing other strange things. The bird feeder in our backyard was torn down and crushed. Not just knocked over, but actually bent and broken. The neighbors' trash cans were tipped over and the garbage strewn about, which everyone blamed on raccoons. But raccoons don't have the strength to drag a 40-pound bag of dog food from someone's garage across their yard. I started researching online, trying to figure out what I might have seen. I looked up bears, moose, even elk, but nothing matched. Then I stumbled onto forums about Bigfoot sightings in Alaska. I've always thought Bigfoot was just a story, something made up to sell t-shirts to tourists. But the descriptions I read matched what I saw. The height, the cone-shaped head, the way it walked. Some people even mentioned the same awful smell. I became obsessed. I started taking photos of tracks I found in the soft ground near the creek. Most were washed out or unclear, but there was one that chilled me to the bone. A huge footprint, easily 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. It was pressed deep into the mud, suggesting whatever made it was incredibly heavy. As the days went on, I started to feel like I was being watched whenever I was outside. I'd be working in the yard and suddenly get this prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I'd turn around, scanning the tree line, but never saw anything. Still, the feeling persisted. Last Friday, I decided to set up a trail camera facing the backyard. I borrowed it from my uncle, who uses it for hunting. I didn't tell him why I wanted it, just said I thought something was getting into my garden. I set it up before dusk, positioning it to cover most of the yard and the edge of the woods. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something on the back deck. It sounded like heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate. Then there was a scratching at the back door, not like an animal pawing to get in, but more like someone dragging their nails across the wood. I was too terrified to get up and look. I just lay there in bed, covers pulled up, listening as the scratching continued for almost a minute before stopping. In the morning, I checked the back door and found 3 long, deep gouges in the wood. They started about 6 feet up and ran diagonally down the door. Whatever made them had to be tall and had some serious claws. I checked the trail camera with shaking hands. Most of the footage showed nothing, just the empty yard in the infrared glow of the camera. But at exactly 3:17 a.m., something moved at the edge of the frame. The image was grainy and dark, but I could make out a large, shadowy figure moving along the tree line. It was upright, much taller than a person, with that same distinctive cone-shaped head. It paused, seeming to look directly at the house, or maybe the camera, then moved out of frame toward the back deck. The next 20 minutes of footage showed nothing. Then the figure appeared again, moving quickly back into the woods. I've watched that footage at least 50 times now. Sometimes I think my mind is playing tricks on me, that it's just a shadow or a deer standing weird, but deep down, I know what I saw both on camera and in person that day on the road. Last night was the worst yet. I was alone in the house. My parents are away visiting my sister in Juneau. Around midnight, I started hearing movement outside. Twigs snapping, leaves rustling, but slow and deliberate, not like a small animal. Then the smell seeped in, stronger than ever. Even with all the windows closed, it was like it was seeping through the walls themselves. I turned off all the lights and sat in the dark living room, peering out through a crack in the curtains. The security light kept flicking on and off as something moved just outside its sensor range. I grabbed my phone, ready to call someone. Who do you even call when there's a possible Bigfoot outside your house? It's not like the local police have a cryptid division. Then I saw it. It moved into the yard from the side of the house, fully upright, massive and dark against the night. The security light caught it, and for a split second, I got a clear look at it. The cone-shaped head wasn't a head at all. It was more like a pointed hood of fur that rose up from its shoulders. Its face was set lower, almost into its chest, with deep-set eyes that caught the light and glowed a dull, reddish yellow. Its arms were even longer than I remembered, with huge hands that nearly touched the ground. It moved toward the back of the house, and I lost sight of it. Then I heard a heavy thud on the back deck, like something very heavy had jumped onto it. The entire house seemed to vibrate. I heard those slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the deck, then stopping at the back door. The scratching started again, but this time it was more insistent, almost angry. It went on for several minutes, accompanied by a low, rumbling growl that I could feel in my chest more than hear. Then came a solid thump against the door, like it had struck it with its fist or body. The door frame actually cracked. I found the damage this morning. I was sure it was going to break in. I was frozen in place, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Then, abruptly, everything went silent. No scratching, no growling, no footsteps. The silence was almost worse than the noise. I sat there for at least an hour, not daring to move, before I finally worked up the courage to turn on a light. This morning I checked the back door and deck. Besides the gouges and the cracked frame, I found tufts of coarse, brownish-black hair caught in the wood. I put them in a plastic bag, evidence of something. I'm not sure what to do with them. Who would believe me? I still don't know what this thing is. Sometimes I think it might be a Bigfoot, but other times I wonder if it's something else entirely. It seems too aggressive, too interested in my house specifically. Whatever it is, it's intelligent. It knows I saw it that day. It knows I've been watching for it, and I think it's watching me back, waiting for something. I'm writing this all down because I'm not sure what's going to happen next. The scratching at my door is getting more insistent each night. The sounds are getting closer, and last night, for the first time, I heard it make a different noise, almost like it was trying to speak. A series of deep guttural sounds that almost formed words. I don't know what it wants from me. I don't know why it chose my house, my neighborhood. All I know is that it's out there right now, even in the daylight, watching and waiting. And when night falls again, I know it'll be back. Story 6. I've been hesitating to share this for years. It happened back in August 1996, but I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've told a few friends over beers, but honestly, most people just think I'm making it up or exaggerating. I'm not. My buddy Justin and I were on an archery elk hunting trip in Second Canyon, right on the Carbon-Emery County line in Utah. We were college students, both 20 years old, and thought we were pretty tough outdoorsmen. This was our first hunting trip without our dads or older friends, just us proving we could handle ourselves in the backcountry. We'd saved up for decent gear, borrowed some stuff, and were feeling pretty confident about the whole thing. We'd planned for 3 days of hunting. The first 2 days were exhausting but normal. Lots of hiking, tracking, waiting, no elk, but we were enjoying being out there. Our camp was basic, a 4-person tent, small campfire ring, and cooler with food. Nothing fancy. We'd picked a spot about half a mile off the main canyon road, tucked into a small clearing surrounded by pines and aspens. That third day was brutal. We'd hiked probably 15 miles total, up and down steep terrain, carrying our bows and packs. By the time we got back to camp around 6 in the evening, we were completely wiped out. My feet were blistered, Justin's shoulders were raw from his pack straps, and we were both starving. We got a small campfire going and fired up this tiny Coleman gas grill we'd brought for cooking. We'd saved our best meal for the last night, 2 thick ribeye steaks. No elk meat to bring home, but at least we'd eat like kings before heading back to our crappy college apartments. While the steaks were cooking, we cracked open a couple beers and started rehashing the day, talking about where we thought the elk might be moving. It was that perfect time of evening where the light gets golden and everything feels peaceful. The temperature was dropping, but it was still comfortable, probably in the high 60s. Just a perfect evening in the mountains. That's when we heard it the first time. It was distant, maybe a mile away, a strange howling sound that echoed through the canyon. At first, we barely registered it. There are cattle grazing permits in parts of that area, so we figured it was just a cow or something, and the canyon was making it sound weird. "Hear that?" Justin asked, pausing mid-sentence. "Yeah, probably just a cow," I said, flipping the steaks. But then it happened again, and again. Every 20 or 30 seconds, this sound would echo through the canyon. It wasn't like any cow I'd ever heard. It was more like yelling. A long, drawn-out yell that started high and went low, then high again. And it had this scratchy quality that made the hair on my arms stand up. "That's not a cow," Justin said after the 4th or 5th time. "Elk bugle," I suggested, but I knew it wasn't. I'd heard elk bugle plenty of times. This was different. No way, man, that sounds, I don't know, human almost. That was exactly it. It sounded human-like, but wrong somehow. Too powerful, too sustained. No human could make a sound that loud and hold it that long. We tried ignoring it, focusing on our steaks and conversation, but the yelling continued, every 20 to 30 seconds like clockwork, and it was getting louder, closer. After about 30 minutes of this, our meal was done, but neither of us had much appetite anymore. The sound had definitely moved closer, maybe half a mile away now, and it was loud, like unnaturally loud. "Should we check it out?" Justin asked, trying to sound casual, but I could tell he was unsettled. Part of me wanted to say hell no, but we were young guys trying to prove our toughness, so I nodded. "Yeah, let's drive up the road a bit and see if we can figure out what it is." We hopped in my old Jeep Cherokee and drove up the canyon road about a quarter mile, then killed the engine and rolled down the windows to listen. The yelling continued, but now it was coming from the direction of our camp. Whatever it was had changed course and was heading right toward where we'd been sitting. "Dude, it's moving toward our camp," Justin said, his voice tight. We quickly turned around and headed back. As we pulled into our campsite, the yelling was now much closer, maybe just a few hundred yards away in the thick forest beside our clearing, and it was so loud now that I could almost feel it in my chest. It was like standing next to a speaker at a concert, except this was just some thing's voice. "What the fuck is that?" Justin whispered as we sat in the Jeep, engine idling. I shook my head. "I don't know. Mountain lion, maybe?" But we both knew it wasn't a mountain lion or a bear or any animal we'd ever encountered before. We decided to finish our food quickly and figure out what to do. Sitting at the picnic table, we ate in silence, just listening to this thing screaming every half minute or so. The sound was impossible to describe accurately. It was like a person trying to imitate a wolf, but with a voice that could carry for miles. Deep, powerful, scratchy, almost guttural, but with these weird inflections that sounded deliberate. Then we heard something else. Footsteps, heavy footsteps, breaking sticks, moving through the underbrush. Close, maybe 100 yards from our tent, and the forest was dense enough that even with the dying daylight, we couldn't see anything through the trees. That's when any pretense of being tough guys completely dissolved. "We need to leave." "Now," I said, standing up. Justin nodded, already gathering his sleeping bag. "Yep, fuck this. We started throwing our gear into the Jeep as fast as possible. The whole time this thing kept yelling, and we could hear it moving around, breaking branches, getting even closer. The footsteps were heavy enough that I swear I could feel tiny vibrations in the ground. We didn't even bother taking down the tent properly. We just yanked out the stakes, pulled out our sleeping bags and pads, and left it half collapsed. The whole time I kept thinking, this is stupid, we're overreacting, but then that yell would come again, and I knew we weren't. As we were making the final trip to the car with our cooler, the yelling suddenly stopped. The silence was almost worse. We both froze, straining to hear where it had gone. Then we heard heavy footsteps much closer, maybe just 50 yards into the tree line. "Get in the car," I hissed, throwing the cooler in the back. We jumped in and I started the engine. Before pulling away, I turned the headlights toward where the sounds had been coming from, illuminating the edge of the pine trees. Nothing, just dark forest, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I threw the Jeep into gear and we got the hell out of there, spraying gravel as we hit the main canyon road. We didn't speak for the first 10 minutes, both of us just processing what had happened. Then Justin broke the silence. "What the actual fuck was that?" "I don't know," I said, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white, but it wasn't normal. "Could it have been someone messing with us?" he asked, but his tone made it clear he didn't believe that. "No way. That sound, no human could make that sound continuously for over an hour, and nobody could navigate that terrain in complete darkness without a light." We drove straight back to our college town that night, a 2-hour drive, barely speaking, just trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. It's been over 25 years now, and I still think about that night regularly. I've gone back and forth on what it could have been. A bear? No, bears don't make sounds like that. Mountain lion? Definitely not. Some weird echo effect making normal animal sounds distorted? Maybe, but that doesn't explain the footsteps or how it seemed to deliberately circle our camp. The most obvious explanation is that someone was messing with us, but I've thought about that a lot, and it just doesn't add up. The terrain was incredibly rough, steep slopes covered in dense trees and underbrush. No one could have followed us or known where we'd set up camp. And again, no human voice could sustain those yells for nearly 2 hours while covering that much ground in complete darkness. I've researched strange encounters in that area since then and found a few similar stories. Some people claim it was Bigfoot, and while I've always been skeptical about that sort of thing, I can't come up with a better explanation. Whatever it was big, it was following us deliberately, and it was making sounds no known animal in those mountains should be able to make. Justin and I don't talk about it much anymore. We went hunting together a few more times after college, but always in different areas and always with more people. Neither of us has been back to Second Canyon. Sometimes I wonder if we overreacted. Maybe it was just some weird atmospheric thing or an animal we weren't familiar with. But then I remember how it felt when those sounds were so close that they vibrated in my chest, and how the footsteps were heavy enough to feel through the ground, and I know we made the right call getting out of there. The thing that still bothers me most isn't the idea that something strange was out there. It's that I don't know what its intentions were. Was it curious, territorial, threatening? That uncertainty has stuck with me. Whatever was stalking us through the trees that night wanted us to know it was there. It wasn't trying to hide. It was announcing itself over and over, getting closer and closer, and I still have no idea what it was. Story 7. I still have trouble sleeping after what happened 3 months ago. I keep replaying it in my head, wondering if I actually saw what I think I saw, or if my mind somehow twisted reality in those split seconds. But the damage to my car was real, the blood was real, and the terror I felt was definitely real. It was just after 12:30 in the morning when it happened. I'd been at a concert in Knoxville with some friends, but decided to head back to Crossville alone, since I had to work early the next day. My friends wanted to hang around and have a few more drinks, but I needed to get home. I'd made that drive dozens of times before and actually enjoyed the mountain roads at night. Fewer cars, beautiful starry skies, and just me with my music. I always take Route 68 through the mountains. It's faster than the interstate and honestly, just more peaceful. That night was clear, like crystal clear with a near full moon. Perfect driving conditions. I was being careful though, because you always have to watch for deer in that area. They're everywhere, and I've had plenty of close calls over the years. My car was running great, a 2015 Honda Civic that I just had serviced the week before. I had the high beams on, windows cracked just a bit to let in that cool mountain air, and was doing about 55 around the bends. Not speeding, but moving at a good clip. I wasn't tired, wasn't drunk, wasn't on my phone. I was just driving, alert, present. I came around this bend. I could probably take you to the exact spot today. When my headlights caught movement on the right shoulder, at first I thought, damn deer, and started to ease off the gas. But something wasn't right about what I was seeing. There were two shapes. One was definitely a deer, but the other was standing upright, beside it. My brain couldn't process what I was looking at. The upright figure was huge, massive shoulders, easily 7 feet tall, and the craziest part, it had the deer slung over one arm like it weighed nothing, like how you'd carry a jacket or something, just casually holding this full-sized deer. I hesitated too long, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. By the time my foot moved to the brake, the figure stepped into my lane. I don't know if it was trying to cross or if it was startled by my headlights, but suddenly it was right in front of me. I didn't have time to swerve. I hit the brakes hard, but I was going too fast. The impact was strange. It felt solid, but also yielding, if that makes any sense. Not like hitting a tree, more like hitting something dense but flesh-like. My hood crumpled immediately. The wipers snapped off, and then there was this blur of dark fur that hit my windshield. I remember seeing a lighter patch, like grayish-white, around what I guess was its head or face. Then it rolled up and over the roof of my car. The whole thing probably took 2 seconds, but it's burned into my memory in slow motion. I must have blacked out for a moment. When I came to, the car had coasted to a stop, half off the road. Steam was rising from the hood in the headlights. The engine was still running, making this awful clicking sound. I sat there, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white, just trying to breathe. The passenger side of my car was totally dented in, with these long scratch marks down the side. There was this reddish-brown smear across my back window that I could see in the rearview mirror. I was shaking so badly I could barely move. I just sat there listening to the engine tick, staring into the tree line, terrified that whatever I'd hit would come back. Part of me felt like I should check if it was injured, the same way you would if you hit a dog or something. But some deeper instinct kept me locked inside that car. I didn't even roll the window down to listen better. I just sat there, paralyzed. My phone showed no service, typical for that stretch of road. I had to make a decision. Sit there and wait for another car, which could be hours at that time of night, or try to drive the damaged car somewhere with phone service. After about 15 minutes of sitting there freaking out, I decided to try driving. The car started moving, making this horrible grinding noise from the front end where the hood was crumpled. The temperature gauge started climbing, but I was only about 7 or 8 miles from the edge of town where there's a 24-hour gas station. I drove as fast as I dared with the damaged car, constantly checking my mirrors, convinced something was following me. I made it to the gas station and immediately locked myself in the bathroom, where I had a complete breakdown for about 20 minutes. The night clerk must have thought I was on drugs or something. When I finally calmed down enough to speak, I just told him I'd hit something on the road and needed to call for a tow. I couldn't bring myself to describe what I'd actually seen. My brother came to pick me up. I told him I thought I'd hit a bear, which was the only thing that made sense given the damage to my car, but I knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't carry deer. Bears don't stand upright like that. Whatever I hit was on 2 legs. The next morning, I went back to look at my car in daylight. The damage was even worse than I thought. The hood was completely crumpled. There were these deep dents on the roof where it had rolled over. The smear on the back window was definitely blood, now dried to a dark brown. And when I looked closer at the front bumper, there were tufts of fur stuck in the crumpled parts. Coarse, dark brown fur. There was blood on the bumper too. I didn't tell the insurance company the whole story. I just said I hit a large animal, probably a bear. They totaled the car. The adjuster even commented that it was one of the worst animal collisions he'd seen, where the car was still drivable afterward. I've gone back to that stretch of road several times since then, but only during daylight hours. I've walked the area where I think the collision happened, looking for, I don't know what. Blood? Fur? Some kind of evidence. But there's nothing there now. Just the regular forest. I can't stop thinking about what I saw. It was unmistakably walking on two legs. It had massive shoulders. Dark brown fur with that weird lighter patch near what I assume was its hairline. And it was carrying a full-grown deer, like it was nothing. I've lost sleep over this. I've questioned my sanity. I've read articles about animals in Tennessee, trying to make sense of it. The only thing that comes close is a Sasquatch. I know how that sounds. Before this happened, I would have laughed at anyone who claimed they saw Bigfoot. But now, I don't know what to believe anymore. The most disturbing part is that I live here. I still drive those roads, whatever that thing was. It's out there in those mountains. I've changed my habits. I don't drive that route at night anymore. I've installed extra lights on my new car. I've even considered moving somewhere with fewer forests, which is ridiculous since I've always loved living near the mountains. I told my brother the full story about a month after it happened. He thinks I was just in shock from the accident and my mind filled in details that weren't there. Maybe he's right, but the image of that thing standing there with a deer in its arms is so vivid, so specific. It doesn't feel like something my brain would just make up. Sometimes I wonder if it survived. The impact was hard enough to total my car, but it was able to roll off the roof. Did it drag itself into the woods to die? Is it still out there? Was it alone? Or are there more of them? I've searched online for similar stories in the area. There are a few vague accounts of something large seen crossing roads at night, but nothing as specific as what I experienced. I haven't reported it officially because I don't want to be that crazy person who claims they hit Bigfoot with their Honda. Last week, I was driving home from work in daylight and saw a deer standing by the roadside in almost the exact same spot. I nearly had a panic attack. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the tree line for any sign of something watching. There was nothing there, of course. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched whenever I drive through there now, like something is waiting just beyond the tree line, just out of sight. Something that knows my car, knows me. I've started taking the longer route through town most days, just to avoid that stretch of road. I don't know what I hit that night. I don't know if I'll ever know for sure. But whatever it was, changed how I see those mountains forever. There's something out there that doesn't fit with what we're told exists in these forests, and it haunts me that I'm one of the few people who knows the truth. Story 8. I've been debating whether to share this for a long time. It happened back in September 2003, and to this day, I can't make sense of it. I've told a few close friends, but most people look at me like I'm crazy when I bring it up. Maybe writing it down will help me process it. My buddies Paul, Marcus and I had planned a pre-season bow hunting trip in Mark Twain National Forest down in southern Missouri. We'd been there a few times before and knew a good spot about 4 miles down an old logging road. I arrived first on September 30th, around 4:30 in the afternoon. The plan was for the others to join me later that evening after they got off work. The campsite was pretty overgrown since our last visit, so I started clearing out some of the tall grass and brush. I wanted to get the site ready before dark. The forest was quiet, that deep quiet you only get when you're miles from civilization. About 15 minutes into working, I heard something that made me freeze. 3 distinct thuds came from the dense tree line to the north. They weren't like twigs snapping underfoot or a branch falling. These were deliberate, heavy impacts that seemed to vibrate through the ground, each one spaced about a second apart. Thud, thud, thud. I stood there with my machete in hand, listening for more, but nothing followed. I told myself it was probably a dead limb falling, or maybe a deer stomping. I went back to work, but kept glancing toward the tree line. While breaking branches for firewood, I noticed rustling in the underbrush to the north. Nothing clear, just movement that disappeared when I focused on it. Then I caught faint movement to the south too. As the sun started setting, I felt watched. Not like when you're in the woods and no animals are curious about you. This was different, intentional. It felt like eyes were on me from multiple directions at once. The hair on my arms stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling. I lit the campfire early, even though it wasn't fully dark yet. I kept looking down the trails, expecting to see something, but there was only shadows growing longer as the sun disappeared. I'd never felt this uneasy in these woods before, and I've been hunting since I was 12. Paul finally pulled up in his truck around 8. I was genuinely relieved to see headlights coming down that logging road. Before I could even mention anything strange, Paul got out of his truck and said, "Man, I felt like something was watching me the whole drive in, like eyes following my truck." That's when my stomach really knotted up. He hadn't even been there 5 minutes, and he felt it too. Marcus arrived about 30 minutes later. We sat around the fire, cracking beers and catching up, trying to ignore the weird vibe. Then this smell hit us. It was awful, like rancid sweat mixed with skunk spray and something rotten. It seemed to drift through our camp in waves, strongest from the south. None of us said much about it, but we all noticed. Our conversation died while it lingered, and we just looked at each other. Then it faded away after maybe 10 minutes. We decided to turn in around 11, since we wanted to be in our stands before sunrise. Marcus went to take a leak at the edge of camp and came back looking seriously freaked out. His face was pale, even in the firelight. "I saw eyeshine," he said, his voice tight. "Red eyeshine, at head height or higher. Way too tall for a deer." "Probably just a coyote on a ridge or something," I suggested, but didn't believe it myself. The way Marcus was shaken up told me it wasn't something normal. We tried to sleep, but I kept waking up, listening to sounds outside. Normal forest sounds suddenly seemed sinister, twigs cracking that seemed too deliberate, rustling that moved too methodically. The next morning, October 1st, I was up before dawn. I grabbed my bow and climbed into my tree stand about a half-mile from camp. The woods were still dark, with just a hint of grey showing through the trees. That's when I heard it. 3 clear knocking sounds from somewhere to the west. Knock, knock, knock. Just like the thuds from yesterday, but sharper, like wood striking wood. I was trying to process what could make that sound when I heard the most unsettling noise. A loud crack, followed by splintering sounds. It wasn't a gunshot. It sounded exactly like a thick branch being violently ripped from a tree. No human could do that without tools, and even then, it would take serious effort. Nothing moved in my shooting lane that morning. No deer, no turkeys, not even squirrels. It was unnaturally quiet, like everything was hiding. I climbed down around 11 and headed back to camp for lunch. Marcus was already there, looking uneasy. "Did you hear anything weird this morning?" I asked. He nodded. I heard what sounded like people talking, but muffled, couldn't make out words. It didn't even sound like English. Then there was this clear whistle, like someone signaling. He shook his head. I looked everywhere, but couldn't find any other hunters. After lunch, I decided to stalk hunt instead of going back to my stand. About a mile from camp, I found something that stopped me cold. 3 red cedar trees, all bent unnaturally at about 8 to 10 feet off the ground. They were all pointing northwest, like markers. These weren't saplings, these were trees with trunks as thick as my wrist. A little further on, I found what looked like a massive nest of branches and sticks. It was huge, about 9 feet long, 6 feet wide and knee-high. Near it were 2 smaller stick structures that resembled crude lean-tos. The hair on my neck stood up. This wasn't made by any animal I knew, and it definitely wasn't made by other hunters. About 150 feet from there, I found a foot-thick tree snapped at about 5 feet height. It wasn't rotted or wind-damaged. It was a healthy tree that had been broken and propped against another tree. Small saplings were wedged around it like braces. The force needed to do that. I couldn't even imagine. I should have taken pictures, but honestly, I just wanted to get away from there. I headed back toward camp as the sun started setting. That's when I heard it. A distant call that sounded like a man hollering, but it went on too long and ended in this ape-like whoop that no human could make. It called twice, the sound echoing between the trees. When I got back to camp, both Paul and Marcus mentioned hearing it too. We stayed close to the fire that night, talking less than usual. Around 3 in the morning, something heavy bumped against the side of our camper, not like a branch in the wind, like something solid and weighty, making deliberate contact. None of us got up to check. The next day, I hunted a different area, but heard the same whispered mumbling and whistles Marcus had described. It seemed to be following me, always just out of sight. I didn't see any deer, not a single one, which was weird for that area. That night was the worst. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a roar that made my whole body go cold. It was deeper than anything a human could produce, like a mixture of a big cat and an enraged man, but massive. It echoed through the forest. Then a second scream came from further away, higher pitched and wild, like a woman's scream combined with an animal cry. I've never heard anything like it before or since. We all heard it. We all sat there in the dark, not speaking, just listening. Nothing followed but dead silence. At first light we searched for tracks, but found nothing clear, just broken underbrush and disturbed areas. That same rotten stench permeated the southwest side of camp. Without saying much, we all started packing up. None of us wanted to spend another night there. As we pulled out, I looked back at those woods and knew without a doubt we had encountered something unexplainable. I've run through every possible explanation, bears, cougars, other hunters playing tricks, but nothing fits. The structures I found, the wood knocks, the calls, the strength needed to snap those trees. I've been a hunter my whole life. I know normal forest sounds and animal behavior. This wasn't normal. It's been almost 20 years, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. I've researched similar encounters since then, and I'm convinced we had a run-in with what people call Bigfoot. Not just one, but a group of them watching us, communicating, maybe even trying to intimidate us into leaving. I've never gone back to that part of Mark Twain National Forest. Some things you experience once and hope never to encounter again. I still hunt, but I'm always listening now for those 3 knocks, always aware that sometimes you're not the only one watching in the woods. Story 9. So it happened last summer while I was out dirt biking with my buddy Mark and my little boy Ethan. Ethan's only 3.5, but he already loves riding on the back of my bike, holding onto me like a little monkey. I've got this custom seat attachment I rigged up, nothing fancy, just something safe enough that I can take him on easy trails. Mark's always giving me shit about being overprotective, but whatever, it's my kid. We were riding on this private timberland outside Centralia that Mark's uncle owns. The guy has like 2,000 acres of forest land that he lets us use whenever we want. It's perfect because there's no other people around, just miles of logging roads and trails through the woods. That day was gorgeous. Late August, clear blue skies, maybe 75 degrees. Perfect riding weather. We'd been out for maybe 2 hours, taking it super easy because of Ethan. Around 1 in the afternoon, we stopped at this clearing I really love. It's like this natural overlook on the side of a mountain where you can see across this whole valley. There's this amazing view where you can see the opposite ridge, maybe half a mile away. We shut off the bikes to take a break, and I was helping Ethan get his little helmet off so he could have some water and a snack. That's when Ethan pointed across the valley and said, "Daddy, what's that man doing?" I didn't think much of it at first because, 3-year-olds say random stuff all the time. But something in his voice made me look up. I followed where his little finger was pointing, across to the opposite ridgeline where there was this big clearing, probably from logging a few years back. And that's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The clearing was probably half a mile away and a few 100 feet below our elevation. But even at that distance, I could make out this figure moving along the top of the ridge. I blinked hard, thinking maybe it was just a shadow or something, but no, it was definitely moving. "Mark," I said, my voice coming out weird. "You seeing this?" Mark was digging in his backpack for his water bottle, but looked up. "Holy shit," he whispered. "What the hell is that?" What freaked me out wasn't just that there was something over there, it was the size of whatever was moving. Even from that distance I could tell it was huge, and I don't mean like big guy huge. I mean abnormally large, like way taller than any person should be. The thing was a uniform tan or brown color, almost like it was wearing a single colored outfit. Or maybe that was just its body, its skin. The thought made my stomach turn. What really got to me was how it moved. It wasn't lumbering or awkward like you'd expect something that big to be. It was moving with purpose, in a completely straight line, directly toward the tree line at the edge of the ridge. It was deliberate, like it knew exactly where it was going. I've been hunting since I was a kid. I know what bears look like when they move. I know what elk look like. This wasn't that. This thing was walking upright the entire time, completely bipedal, and its proportions were just wrong. The arms seemed too long, swinging slightly as it walked. The shoulders were massive, much wider than would be normal. I found myself holding my breath as I watched it. Ethan was still staring too, completely quiet, which is not normal for him. The three of us just stood there, frozen, watching this thing traverse the rocky terrain of the clearing. Its form was silhouetted perfectly against the lighter background of the clearing. It took maybe 30 seconds for it to cross the visible part of the clearing. Then it just disappeared into the forest at the edge of the ridge. 1 second it was there, this massive shape moving deliberately across the landscape, and the next it was gone, swallowed by the trees. For a few moments after it vanished, none of us said anything. The only sound was the wind in the trees and some birds chirping nearby. It was Mark who broke the silence. "Tell me that wasn't what I think it was," he said, his voice strained. I just shook my head, my mouth dry. "I don't know what the hell that was." Ethan tugged at my jacket. "Was that a monster, Daddy?" The question sent a chill down my spine. Kids have this way of cutting right to the heart of things sometimes. Was it a monster? I didn't know, but it sure as hell wasn't anything I recognized. "No, buddy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably just a really big person taking a hike." But even as I said it, I knew that was bullshit. No hiker would be out there. That ridge was on private property, miles from any public trail, and no human being I've ever seen moves like that or is that size. Mark was already pulling out his phone. "I'm going to try to get a picture," he said, but I knew it was pointless. The thing was gone, and even if it hadn't been, his phone camera wouldn't have captured anything useful at that distance. Still, he zoomed in as far as he could and took a few shots of the ridge where we'd seen it. "We should go check it out," Mark said, already putting his helmet back on. "Are you fucking insane?" I hissed, glancing at Ethan to make sure he didn't hear the curse. "I'm not taking my kid anywhere near whatever that was." "Come on, Nate," Mark said. "Don't you want to know? We could ride down around the valley and up the other side, 20 minutes tops." For a split second, I actually considered it. The curiosity was killing me. What had we just seen? But then I looked at Ethan, who was now sitting on a rock, playing with some pine cones he'd found. apparently already moved on from the monster sighting. No way was I putting him at risk. Not happening, I said firmly. Not with Ethan here. Mark looked disappointed but nodded. Yeah, you're right. Probably nothing anyway. Just some, I don't know, something normal. But his voice lacked conviction. We both knew what we'd seen wasn't normal by any definition. We stayed at the clearing for another 15 minutes or so, but the mood had changed. I kept finding myself staring across at that ridge, half expecting to see the figure emerge from the trees again. It never did, but I couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. It was like suddenly I was aware of how exposed we were on that overlook, how visible we might be from the other side of the valley. Let's head back, I finally said, and Mark didn't argue. The ride back to the truck was tense. I kept Ethan close, and we stuck to the widest, most open trails. Every time we passed a particularly dense patch of forest, I found myself speeding up a little. I kept thinking about how fast that thing had been moving. If it decided to cross the valley, how long would it take to reach our side? How fast could something that big actually move? When we got back to the truck, we loaded up the bikes in record time. As I was strapping Ethan into his car seat, he looked at me with those big, innocent eyes and said, "Can we come back tomorrow and see the big man again?" I forced a smile. "Not tomorrow, buddy. Maybe another time." On the drive home, Mark and I tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a guy in a ghillie suit, we said. Maybe it was just a really tall hiker wearing brown clothes. Maybe the distance made it look bigger than it was. But we both knew those explanations didn't add up. No hunter would be out there in August. No hiker would be that far from any trail. And the way it moved, it wasn't human movement. I've been in the woods my whole life, and I know what people look like when they hike. This was different. That night, after I put Ethan to bed, I went online and started researching. I looked up reports of Bigfoot sightings in the Centralia area. I wasn't surprised to find quite a few. The Pacific Northwest is kind of the epicenter for that stuff. What did surprise me was how similar some of the descriptions were to what we'd seen. The height, the coloring, the deliberate movement. I've never been the type to believe in cryptids or monsters or whatever. I'm a practical guy. I work as a mechanic, for God's sake. I deal in things I can touch and fix. But what I saw that day doesn't fit into my understanding of the world, and that scares the shit out of me. Mark texted me the pictures he took, but they're useless. Just blurry shots of a distant ridgeline. You can't make out anything in them. He keeps wanting to go back. But without Ethan this time, part of me wants to, just to prove to myself that there's a rational explanation. But a bigger part of me is terrified of finding out that there isn't. It's been 3 months now, and I still think about it almost every day. I've told a few people, my brother, a couple close friends. But I can see the skepticism in their eyes. I get it. If someone told me this story a year ago, I'd think they were full of shit too. But here's the thing that really keeps me up at night. Ethan still asks about the big man in the woods. Kids his age usually forget things pretty quickly, but not this. Whatever impression that thing made on him, it's stuck. Sometimes he'll be playing with his toys, and I'll overhear him telling stories about the big forest man. It makes my skin crawl every time. I don't know what we saw that day. I don't know if it was a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch or just some weird optical illusion, but I know it wasn't normal, and I know that somewhere out in those woods, there's something moving around that shouldn't exist according to everything I've been taught about the natural world. I haven't been back to those trails since. Mark's gone a few times, always trying to get me to come along. He hasn't seen anything else, but that doesn't make me feel any better. Whatever that thing was, it's still out there. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night and the house is quiet, I can't help but wonder, did it see us too? And if it did, would it recognize us if we ever crossed paths again? I don't think I want to find out. Story 10. I've never shared this before, not fully anyway. Even 22 years later, I struggle to make sense of what happened that summer in Alaska. My husband Dave thinks I should just let it go. But how do you let go of something that fundamentally changes how you see the world? It was the summer of 2002. Dave had taken a seasonal job managing a small, remote campground near Chugach National Forest. We were excited about the opportunity. Dave working outdoors, me homeschooling our daughter Emily, who was 14 at the time, and all of us experiencing the Alaskan wilderness together. The job came with a small cabin that was rustic but comfortable. No internet, spotty cell service, but it had electricity, running water, and incredible views. The campground was about 30 miles from the nearest town, accessible by a single gravel road that wound through dense forest alongside a creek. There was a gate at the entrance that Dave locked every night at 10. Anyone coming in after that needed to park outside and walk. Things were pretty uneventful for the first few weeks. Emily made friends with the daughter of a tour guide who worked in the area. Her name was Jessie, and her dad Tom ran guided hiking trips around the forest. Emily would sometimes go into town with them when Dave or I couldn't take her. It was early July, the 7th, I think, when everything changed. Emily had gone into town with Jessie and Tom that afternoon to see a movie and get some supplies. They were supposed to drop her at the gate around 9:30 and Dave would pick her up. But Dave got tied up with some campers who'd had a bear visit their site. He radioed me, we had walkie-talkies for communication around the grounds, to say he couldn't get Emily and asked if I could. I was in the middle of cooking dinner and the cabin was about half a mile from the front gate. I told Emily over the phone to just walk back. It wasn't dark yet, and she'd done it before. Alaska in July means daylight until nearly midnight, so visibility wasn't a concern. When Emily didn't come back after 20 minutes, I started to worry. It shouldn't take more than 15 minutes to walk from the gate to our cabin. I was about to radio Dave when I heard the front door burst open. Emily stumbled in, her face white, breathing so hard she couldn't speak. Her jacket was unzipped and falling off one shoulder. She had dirt on her knees and hands like she'd fallen. "Emily? What happened? Are you okay?" I rushed over to her, checking for injuries. She just shook her head, still trying to catch her breath. I guided her to the couch and got her some water. "Mom," she finally gasped. Something was following me. My first thought was bear. We'd had several in the area that summer. "A bear? Did you see it?" She shook her head. "No, I don't know what it was. It was in the creek at first. I heard splashing, like something big walking through water. I thought maybe it was a moose." I relaxed a little. Moose were common. "But then," she continued, her voice shaking, "it moved out of the water, onto the gravel, and it was keeping pace with me. When I walked faster, it walked faster." A chill ran through me. Could it have been campers or Dave? She shook her head vigorously. It wasn't human footsteps. It was heavier, and when I started running, it started running too. I pulled her close, trying to calm her down, while my own heart started racing. "It's okay. You're safe now." "I dropped the candy Tom bought me," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. It struck me as such a small detail, but that's what scared her. Not the loss of candy, but the moment of panic that made her drop it. I was about to radio Dave when something made me look toward the window. Our cabin had large windows facing the forest. The main living area had one that looked out onto a small clearing before the trees started. As I glanced that way, I saw something that stops my heart to this day when I think about it. There was a face looking in at us, not pressed against the glass, but a few feet back, just watching. The window was about 7 feet off the ground from the outside due to the cabin's foundation. Whatever was looking in had to be at least 8 or 9 feet tall. I froze, completely froze. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a moose, it wasn't human. The face was flat with a broad nose and round, dark eyes that reflected no light. Its head seemed to sit directly on massive shoulders with barely any neck. and it was covered, entirely covered in dark, coarse-looking hair, maybe 2 or 3 inches long. We stared at each other for what felt like forever, but was probably just seconds. It didn't seem aggressive, it was just observing, like it was curious. Then I snapped out of it and lunged for Emily, pulling her away from the window and into the kitchen. I grabbed the radio with shaking hands and called Dave, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dave, I need you at the cabin. Now, don't ask questions, just come." His reply was immediate. "On my way." I kept Emily in the kitchen, away from the windows. She was crying silently now, clutching my arm. "Was that what was following you?" I whispered. She nodded. I felt it the whole way, like it was right behind me. "Did you see it?" "No, I was too scared to look back. I just ran." I peeked around the corner. The window was empty now. Whatever had been there was gone, or at least not visible. Dave burst through the door 5 minutes later, shotgun in hand. I'd never been so relieved to see him. "What happened?" he demanded, eyes scanning the room. I told him everything. Emily being followed, the face at the window. I could see he didn't fully believe me, but he went outside anyway, shotgun ready, and walked the perimeter of the cabin. He found nothing except some disturbed gravel near the window where I'd seen the thing. "No tracks?" I asked when he came back in. "Nothing clear," he said. "Ground's too hard and rocky here." The 3 of us stayed up late that night, jumpy at every sound. Around midnight we heard it, a scream from the forest that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't an elk or a wolf or a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion, which can sound eerily human. This was something else entirely. It started low and built to a pitch that seemed impossible, echoing through the trees. It lasted maybe 10 seconds. Dave's face had gone pale. "What the hell was that?" "That's what I heard by the creek," Emily whispered, before I started running. We heard it 3 more times that night, each one further away than the last. The next morning, Dave went to the spot where Emily said she'd dropped her candy. It was gone. He searched the area and found something disturbing. A clear set of enormous footprints in a muddy patch near the creek. They were roughly human-shaped, but much larger, maybe 15 inches long. He took photos with our digital camera. We debated leaving right then, but Dave had signed a contract through September, and jobs weren't easy to come by. He convinced me it was probably just a one-time encounter, maybe with a particularly large bear that had stood up. The footprints could be anything, he said. Maybe overlapping moose tracks that just looked like feet. I didn't believe him. Neither did he, really. Over the next few weeks, we heard the screams almost nightly, always after dark, always from different directions. Dave started keeping Emily and me inside after dinner, and he carried the shotgun whenever he had to go out. We weren't the only ones experiencing things. Campers reported strange noises, feeling watched. One family packed up and left at 2 in the morning after something too big to be a bear circled their campsite repeatedly. Tom, the tour guide, came by one afternoon in late July. He looked shaken. He'd been leading a cave tour about 10 miles from our campground when everyone heard a scream echo through the stone chambers. Tom knew it couldn't be a person. They were in a section accessible only by their group. He ended the tour immediately and got everyone out. "Sarah," he said quietly, while Emily and Jessie were out of earshot, "people around here talk about things in these woods, things that aren't supposed to exist." "Like what?" I asked, though I already knew. "The locals have names for them. The hairy man, the forest people. Most outsiders call them Bigfoot." He paused. I never believed it until now. I told him about what we'd seen and heard. He nodded, unsurprised. "There've been sightings in this area for decades. Most people keep quiet about it. They're afraid of being laughed at, or worse, attracting thrill seekers who might disturb whatever's out there." The rest of the summer passed in a state of high tension. We never saw the creature at our window again, but the screams continued. Dave found large, inexplicable footprints several more times. Something repeatedly broke into our metal trash containers, despite the bear-proof locks. One morning in August, I found a pile of huckleberries on our porch steps. just sitting there, carefully arranged, not scattered like an animal would leave them, placed. We made it to September without further direct encounters. As soon as Dave's contract ended, we packed up and left. We never returned to Alaska. Emily refused to talk about that summer afterward. She still doesn't, even now at 36. If anyone brings it up, she leaves the room. The experience changed her. She won't go camping, won't hike in dense forests, won't even stay in remote cabins. For years after, she had nightmares about being chased through the woods. I've spent countless hours researching what we might have encountered. I've read every book, every article, every forum post about Bigfoot and similar creatures. Some accounts match our experience so closely it's chilling. I've never been able to explain what happened that summer. I know what I saw looking through our window. Not a bear, not a person in a costume, something else, something that shouldn't exist but does. Something that was curious enough to follow my daughter home and look in our window, but not aggressive enough to harm us when it clearly could have. Dave eventually convinced himself it was all explainable. A large bear, mountain lions, overactive imaginations fueled by isolation. But he can't explain why he still wakes up in a cold sweat sometimes, or why he insisted on motion sensor floodlights at our current home, which is nowhere near the wilderness. As for me, I remember every detail of that face at the window, the flat features, the dark eyes that seemed too aware, too intelligent. I remember how it just watched us, not threatening, not aggressive, just curious. That's what haunts me the most. Not that it was monstrous, but that it seemed almost human in its curiosity, that it might have been thinking about us the same way we were thinking about it. 22 years later, and I still check the windows before bed every night, no matter where I am. Some fears never leave you. Story 11. I've never been one to believe in monsters or the supernatural. I'm a practical man who's lived in these mountains my whole life. I know the sounds of cougars, bears, and coyotes like the back of my hand. But what happened that night at Kennedy Meadows in '99? I still can't explain it. I don't talk about it much, but I need to get this off my chest. My name's Dink Getty. I've been running a pack train business in the Sequoias for over 30 years, hauling supplies to camps and cabins on the eastern slope of the Sierras. It's hard work, but I love my animals and the mountains. Always have. I'm a big fella, 6'4", 270, and most folks around here say I'm built like a tree trunk. Never had much trouble handling myself in the wilderness. The day it happened started like any other. It was late September, getting colder at night, but still decent weather. I'd just finished a 3-day haul up to some research scientists camped near Olancha Peak. Got back to my place near Kennedy Meadows around 4 in the afternoon, unloaded my gear, fed and brushed down my animals, and put them in the corral for the night. I had 12 that season. 8 mules and 4 horses, all of them strong, trail-hardened animals that knew their jobs. I remember being extra tired that evening. The trail had been rough with some early snow up high, and I was looking forward to a hot meal and my own bed. After taking care of the animals, I heated up some stew I'd made before leaving, had a couple beers, and turned in early, around 8. The first thing that woke me was Sadie, my lead mare, whinnying. Not her normal sound, but something high-pitched and panicked. Before I could even sit up, the whole corral erupted. I've never heard anything like it. My animals were screaming, not just normal scared horse sounds, but actual screaming. The wooden fence posts were creaking and thudding as they slammed against them. I could hear hooves pounding the dirt, the metallic rattle of the gates shaking. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my shotgun and flashlight, and pulled on my boots. Didn't even bother with a shirt, just ran out in my jeans. The temperature had dropped to maybe 40 degrees, and my breath was fogging in the beam of my flashlight. The moon was nearly full, so I could see pretty well once my eyes adjusted. What hit me first was the smell. Anyone who's worked with animals knows their fear has a scent, sharp, acrid, unmistakable. But this was different. Mixed with the animal fear was something else. Something musky and rotten, like wet fur left to molder in a swamp. It was so strong it made my eyes water. As I rounded the corner of my cabin, I could see the corral about 30 yards away. The animals were still in complete panic, running in circles, crashing into the fencing. I shouted to try to calm them, but they didn't even seem to hear me. That's when I noticed the shadows moving around the far side of the corral. Too big for a cougar, moving too fast and upright for a bear. I raised my shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. Everything went silent for maybe 3 seconds. The horses, the night insects, everything. Then from the darkness beyond the corral came a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a roar or a growl. It was, I don't know how to describe it except to say it sounded like a person trying to imitate a bull elk bugling, but deeper, louder, and with this gurgling quality that made the hair on my arm stand up. My animals went absolutely berserk. I ran toward the corral, shouting and firing another shot in the direction of the sound. As I got closer, I could see something big moving away into the tree line. The moonlight only caught it for a second, but what I saw didn't make sense. It was massive, at least 7 feet tall, moving on 2 legs, but not like a human. It was too fluid, too fast, covering ground in these long, swinging strides. When I reached the corral gate, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 6 of my animals, 4 mules and 2 horses, were down on the ground. At first I thought they might just be injured or spooked into lying down. But as I swung my flashlight over them, I saw the blood, so much blood. It had soaked into the dirt, turning it to mud in places. They weren't just dead. They'd been torn open from throat to belly, their insides pulled out and scattered around them. But here's the thing that still haunts me. Nothing had been eaten, not a single bite. It was like whatever did this just wanted to kill them and rip them apart. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open the gate. The remaining animals were huddled in the far corner, trembling and making these soft, terrified noises. I've seen what bears and mountain lions do to livestock. This wasn't that. The cuts weren't ragged like from claws or teeth. They were almost deliberate. And the strength it would take to do this to 6 full-grown pack animals in what couldn't have been more than a few minutes. I got the surviving animals out of the corral and into a small shed where I store hay. They were so scared they didn't even resist being crowded in there. I locked them in and went back to check if any of the downed animals might still be alive. They weren't. That's when I noticed the tracks. Around the bodies, pressed into the blood-soaked earth, were footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen. They were huge, easily 18 inches long, and shaped somewhat like a human foot but wider, with what looked like 5 toes. The stride length between them was unbelievable, at least 4 feet. Whatever made these wasn't just big, it was fast. I followed the tracks to where they led out of the corral. The gate hadn't been opened. This thing had jumped the 5-foot fence, both in and out, while killing 6 large animals. The tracks continued into the woods, heading northeast toward the higher elevations. I was shaking uncontrollably by then, partly from the cold, but mostly from fear and shock. I went back to the cabin, called the county sheriff on my landline, and reported what happened. The dispatcher clearly thought I was drunk or crazy, but said they'd send someone out in the morning. I spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair by the window with my shotgun across my lap, watching the tree line, listening to every sound. The sheriff and a game warden showed up around 9 the next morning. They walked around the corral, took some pictures, asked a lot of questions. The game warden suggested it might have been a rogue bear, maybe rabid or injured. The sheriff nodded along, but I could tell neither of them really believed that. They saw the same things I did, the precision of the killings, the lack of feeding, those massive tracks that had started to dry in the morning sun. Never seen a bear do anything like this, the game warden finally admitted. And these tracks, they're unusual. What do you think it was? I asked him. He just shook his head. Don't know. Could be someone playing a prank, maybe wearing some kind of custom boots to make these prints. But we all knew that was bullshit. No human could have done what I saw done to those animals, and no prankster could have made that sound that froze the night. About a week later, I heard about Tom Erickson, who lives about 7 miles from me up toward the higher meadows. Apparently the same night my animals were killed, something attacked his dogs. Tom had 5 hunting dogs he kept outside his cabin. He told me he woke up to them barking and raising hell, then heard them yelping and thudding against the side of his house. When he went out to check, all 5 dogs were dead, their necks broken. Tom said it looked like something had picked them up by their hind legs and slammed them against the cabin walls until they stopped barking. The rangers said it might have been a mountain lion, but Tom and I both know better. Mountain lions are ambush predators. They don't grab dogs and swing them against buildings, and they sure as hell don't gut 6-pack animals without eating a single bite. I've lived in these mountains all my life. I respect the wilderness and the predators that call it home. But what happened that night wasn't natural. I sold my remaining animals the next month and switched to using ATVs for my supply runs. I still work these trails, but I don't stay out after dark anymore, and I never go anywhere without my gun. Some folks around here talk about Sasquatch. Most just joke about it. I used to laugh along. Not anymore. I don't know what to call what I saw that night, but it wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, and sure as hell wasn't human. All I know is it was strong enough to kill my animals with ease, smart enough to target them specifically, and angry enough to do it just for the sake of killing. This happened over 20 years ago now, but I still wake up sometimes hearing that sound, that deep, gurgling bugle that silenced everything else in the forest. And on nights when the moon is full and the wind is still, I swear I can smell that same musky, rotting odor drifting down from the high country. I don't tell this story often. Most people think I'm exaggerating or flat out lying, but I know what I saw, and I know what's out there in those mountains waiting. Story 12. I've never been a believer in cryptids or monsters or any of that stuff. Growing up, I was always the skeptical one. The guy who'd roll his eyes whenever someone started talking about Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. I was that annoying person who'd demand, "Where's the evidence?" whenever my friends shared stories about strange creatures in the woods. That all changed last summer. I'm still trying to process what happened that night on the Santee River. I've gone back and forth between thinking I hallucinated the whole thing and accepting that maybe there are things in this world that science hasn't catalogued yet. My girlfriend Emma doesn't like talking about it anymore. She refuses to go camping, period. Not just at Santee, but anywhere. For context, I grew up spending summers at my grandparents' place near the Santee Dam in South Carolina. My grandfather used to take me fishing and camping along the river. He was a practical man, a former mechanic who'd served in Vietnam and wasn't prone to flights of fancy. But sometimes, after a few beers around the campfire, he'd get this distant look in his eyes and start talking about something he'd encountered in those woods when he was younger. "It wasn't a bear, Tommy," he'd say, staring into the flames. "Bears don't move like that. This was something else. Something like a bear, only not quite." He never elaborated much beyond that, and I always chalked it up to the beer talking or him trying to spook his grandson. Fast forward to last July, I'd been dating Emma for about a year, and I wanted to show her this beautiful camping spot about a mile downstream from the dam where my grandfather used to take me. It's a bit secluded. You have to hike in about half a mile from where you park your car, but it's worth it. There's a small clearing on a bluff overlooking the river with a steep 50-foot embankment that leads down to the water. The spot isn't on any official campground maps, which is why I liked it. No crowds, just pure nature. We arrived around 3 in the afternoon. It was hot as hell, typical South Carolina summer. The humidity was so thick you could practically swim through it. We hiked in with our gear, and I was feeling nostalgic, showing Emma all the landmarks I remembered from my childhood. We set up our tent in the clearing, got a small fire going, and cracked open a couple of beers to cool down. Everything was perfect until around 7 that evening, just as the sun was starting to set. We were sitting by the fire, cooking hot dogs on sticks, when we heard splashing in the river below. Not just the gentle lapping of water against the shore, but big, deliberate splashes. At first, I figured it was probably some kid swimming or maybe fishermen, but then the splashing got more violent and we heard what sounded like several deer crashing through the water. "What's that?" Emma asked, pausing with her hot dog halfway to her mouth. I stood up and walked to the edge of the bluff, peering down at the river. The light was fading fast, but I could make out ripples in the water and what looked like 3 or 4 deer on the opposite bank, running into the tree line as if something had spooked them. "Just some deer crossing the river," I said, but something felt off. Deer don't usually cross deep rivers unless they're spooked, and they seemed to be running from our side to the opposite bank. I was about to turn back when I heard it. A deep, heavy splash from directly below our campsite, followed by the sound of something large beginning to climb up the embankment. Let me be clear about this embankment. It's not an easy climb. It's steep, about 50 feet high, with loose dirt and rocks. I'd climbed it as a kid, but it took effort and time. Whatever was coming up was moving fast, snapping branches and dislodging small dirt slides with each movement. "Thomas?" Emma's voice had an edge of panic to it. "What is that?" "Probably a deer," I said, but I didn't believe it. No deer would climb that slope instead of using one of the many gentler access points further along the bank. The climbing sounds got louder, heavy footsteps, deliberate movements. Whatever it was big, and it was coming straight up toward our campsite. I backed away from the edge, my heart pounding in my chest. "Get your shoes on," I told Emma. "We should head back to the truck." "What? Why?" She could hear the fear in my voice. "I'm not sure what's coming up that hill, but I don't want to find out." We quickly grabbed our phones and car keys, leaving everything else behind. Just as we were about to head back to the trail, we heard a loud crash from the edge of the embankment, like something had finally pulled itself up onto level ground. We didn't stick around to see what it was. We bolted for the trail, moving as fast as we could through the darkening woods. I could hear Emma breathing hard beside me, and I kept glancing back over my shoulder, convinced we were being followed. The trail seemed twice as long in the dark, with tree branches clawing at our faces and roots trying to trip us up. We finally broke out of the tree line and sprinted for my truck. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hit the unlock button. We practically dove inside, and I cranked the engine, flipping on the headlights. That's when we saw it. Right in front of the truck, illuminated perfectly in the headlights, stood the largest creature I've ever seen. It was at least 8 feet tall, maybe taller, covered in dark, matted hair, not fur like a bear. This was hair, long and tangled in places, especially around the shoulders. Its body was massive, with a barrel chest and long, powerful arms that hung down past its knees. But it was the creature's face that haunts me. It had a sloped forehead and a pronounced brow ridge, like a cross between a gorilla and a human, but much, much larger. And its eyes, God, its eyes, they reflected my headlights with a deep burning red glow. It stood in this weird, forward slumped posture, like its upper body was too heavy for its legs. But there was nothing awkward about it. It looked powerful, primal. It looked like it could tear my truck apart if it wanted to, for what felt like an eternity, probably only 5 or 6 seconds in reality. It just stared at us. I was frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Emma was completely silent beside me, but I could feel her trembling. Then, without warning, the creature took 2 massive strides to the side of the road and disappeared into the thick underbrush. Just like that, it was gone. The entire encounter couldn't have lasted more than 10 seconds, but it's burned into my memory like a brand. I slammed the truck into reverse, spinning gravel as I backed up, then shifted and floored it down the access road. Emma was crying quietly beside me, and I realized I was shaking so badly I could barely keep the wheel straight. "What the fuck was that?" she finally whispered when we hit the main road. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I really don't know." We drove straight to a motel about 20 miles away and got a room. Neither of us slept. We just sat on the bed, lights on, jumping at every sound outside. Around dawn, Emma asked what we were going to do about our camping gear. I didn't want to go back. Everything in me screamed to just write it off as a loss and never return to that spot again. But we had my grandfather's vintage Coleman stove, our tent, sleeping bags, over $1,000 worth of gear, and in the harsh light of morning, I started to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was just a large black bear standing on its hind legs. Maybe the red eyes were just a trick of the headlights. So around noon, we reluctantly drove back. I brought my grandfather's old .30-06 rifle from the truck's gun rack, something I'd never thought I'd need on a simple camping trip. The campsite looked completely normal in the daylight. Our tent was still standing, though one of the guy lines had been snapped. The fire had burned out. Our cooler was untouched. It looked peaceful, serene even. But then I noticed the edge of the embankment. The soil was torn up, with deep gouges where something had clearly pulled itself up. These weren't marks made by a human climber or even a bear. The spacing was too wide, the indentations too deep. I approached cautiously, rifle ready, and peered over the edge. About halfway down the slope, a small tree had been completely snapped, not cut, not broken by wind, but snapped as if something massive had grabbed it for support, and it had given way under the weight. Emma called me over to the side of our campsite, where the ground was softer. There, pressed into the damp earth, was a footprint. Not a bear print, not a human print, but something in between. It was huge, at least 16 inches long and incredibly wide, with what looked like 5 toes. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was extremely heavy. We packed up our gear in record time and got the hell out of there. On the drive home, we tried to make sense of what we'd experienced. Emma was convinced we'd seen a Sasquatch, though she'd never believed in them before. I wasn't ready to put a label on it, but I knew what we'd encountered wasn't a known animal. That was 8 months ago. I've spent countless hours researching Bigfoot sightings in South Carolina, particularly around the Santee River. Turns out there have been dozens of reports over the years, many describing exactly what we saw: the massive size, the red eye shine, the incredible strength. 2 months after our encounter, my Uncle Mitch, who hunts on the island in the middle of the Santee River about a mile from our campsite, called me out of the blue. He'd never heard about our experience. We'd kept it mostly to ourselves, afraid of the ridicule. "Tommy," he said, his voice uncharacteristically serious, "have you ever heard anything strange while camping down by the river?" My blood ran cold. "What do you mean by strange?" "I was in my deer stand yesterday evening and I heard something walking below me. Not a deer, not a hog. Something big, real big. It was walking on 2 legs, Tommy. I've been hunting these woods for 40 years and I've never heard anything like it." I finally told him what Emma and I had seen. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Your grandfather used to talk about something in those woods," he finally said. "Most of us thought he was just spinning tales. Now I'm not so sure. I don't know what to believe anymore. I know what I saw, what Emma saw, what my uncle heard. I know my grandfather wasn't making up stories after all. There's something out there in the woods along the Santee River. Something large, something powerful, something that's managed to stay hidden despite decades of human encroachment. I haven't been camping since that night. I'm not sure I ever will again. Sometimes, when I close my eyes at night, I still see those burning red eyes staring at me through my windshield. I still hear the sound of something massive climbing up that steep embankment, coming straight for our camp. Whatever it was real. And it's still out there." Story 13. I'm still not sure if I should be sharing this, but it's been haunting me for 15 years now, and I need to get it off my chest. I've tried telling a few people over the years, but the looks I get, well, you know how it goes. But this happened Every detail is burned into my memory from that night in September 2008, just outside Port Allegheny, Pennsylvania. It was a Friday night, and my brother-in-law Tom and his girlfriend Melissa were visiting for the weekend. We'd been sitting around having a few beers, nothing crazy, just catching up. Around 2 in the morning, Tom suggested we take a walk to clear our heads before bed. It wasn't unusual for us. I lived in a pretty rural area with these quiet gravel roads that hardly ever saw traffic, especially that late at night. The air was crisp that night, not cold enough for jackets, but cool enough that you could feel fall coming. There was barely a moon, so we were using our phone lights to see where we were walking. We'd gone maybe half a mile from my house, just talking about nothing important, when it hit us. The smell. God, I've never forgotten that smell. It wasn't just bad, it was wrong. People always ask if it was like a dead animal, but it wasn't. I've smelled plenty of roadkill and hunting remains in my life. This was different. Imagine the worst body odor you've ever smelled, mixed with something rotten and earthy and, I don't know, musky? It was so strong it made my eyes water. It felt like it was coating the inside of my nose and throat. "What the hell is that?" Tom said, pulling his shirt up over his nose. Melissa was gagging. "That's disgusting." We quickened our pace to get past whatever was causing it. The smell was strongest right beside this deep drainage ditch that ran alongside the road. It was probably 6 feet deep, with tall grass growing at the bottom, then woods beyond it. The smell faded as we walked on, and after another couple hundred feet, curiosity got the better of us. "Should we go back and see what that was?" I asked. I was thinking maybe someone had dumped something illegal, or maybe there was some animal carcass we should report. We turned around and headed back toward the smell, our phone lights pointed toward the ditch. I remember Tom joking that if it was a dead body, we were going to be on the news. We weren't laughing a minute later. As we approached the spot where the smell had been strongest, I was leaning over, trying to shine my light down into the ditch to see if I could spot anything. That's when it happened. Something stood up from the tall grass. It didn't jump up suddenly. It rose, like something that had been crouching and was now standing to its full height, and its full height was impossible. Even standing in the bottom of that ditch, its head was almost level with us on the road. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing was looking me nearly eye to eye while standing 6 feet below me. Do the math. It was massive. My light caught it directly in the face for just a split second. I'll never forget those eyes reflecting back at me, like a deer's eyes in headlights, but higher off the ground than any deer could ever be. The face was wrong. Not quite human, not quite animal. Broad nose, deep-set eyes. I could make out massive shoulders, not like a bodybuilder, but like something built for power. The body was covered in dark hair or fur, not patchy like a mangy bear, but full. Its arms hung longer than they should have, with hands that seemed too big. We all froze. It froze for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 seconds. We just stared at each other. Then Melissa screamed, not a little yelp, a full-on horror movie scream that broke the standoff. The thing turned. I remember the way its whole body moved in one fluid motion, and it started running through the bottom of the ditch. The sound of it crashing through the brush was unlike anything I'd heard before, not like a deer or even a bear. Heavier, purposeful. It was heading away from the road, into the trees. "Go! Go! Go!" I remember shouting, and we all turned and ran back toward my house. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning, but the adrenaline pushed me forward. I kept looking over my shoulder, terrified that thing was following us. We were passing this cornfield on our right, the Edwards place, when I noticed something else strange. There was a small herd of deer bolting across the field, heading in the same direction we were. They were spooked bad, running full tilt like their lives depended on it. Then we heard it, a sound that still gives me chills when I think about it. From behind us, back in the direction where we'd seen the thing, came this scream that turned into a howl. It wasn't a coyote or a wolf. We have those around here, and I know what they sound like. This was deeper, louder, more human, but not human at all. It echoed across the valley and seemed to go on forever. Melissa started crying as we ran. Tom kept saying, what the fuck, over and over. I couldn't say anything. I was too focused on getting back to my house, locking the door, and trying to make sense of what we'd just seen. When we finally made it back, we slammed the door behind us and locked it. We were all breathing hard, sweating despite the cool night. For a few minutes, none of us said anything. We just tried to catch our breath and process what had happened. That wasn't a bear, Tom finally said. Bears don't stand like that. And it was too tall, I added. Way too tall. Melissa was still shaking. Did you see its face? Did you see its eyes? We stayed up the rest of the night with all the lights on, jumping at every sound outside. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear standing on something. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion because of the ditch and the darkness. But we all knew what we'd seen. The next morning, in the daylight, Tom and I went back, not all the way to the spot. We weren't that brave, but far enough to see if there was any evidence. The smell was gone. We didn't see any obvious tracks from the road, and neither of us was willing to climb down into that ditch to look closer. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep well. Every noise outside my house made me freeze. I started keeping my curtains closed at night. I bought a more powerful flashlight and started carrying it whenever I went outside after dark. I didn't tell many people at first. Who would believe it? But I couldn't stop thinking about it, so I started researching. I watched documentaries about Bigfoot sightings. I read accounts from other people who claimed to have seen something similar. And so many details matched. The smell, the size, the way it moved, and especially that scream. Before that night, I would have laughed if someone told me they'd seen Bigfoot. Now I don't laugh. I know what I saw wasn't a bear, wasn't a moose, wasn't any normal animal that lives in those woods. It was something else. Tom and Melissa don't like talking about it. When I bring it up, they get uncomfortable and change the subject. I think they've convinced themselves it was something explainable. I can't do that. I've tried, but I can't unsee what I saw that night. I still live in the same house. I still walk those roads sometimes, but never at night and never alone, and I never ever go near that ditch. Sometimes when I drive past it during the day, I slow down and look over, half expecting to see something watching me from the trees beyond. The worst part is the not knowing. What was it doing there that night? Was it just passing through, or does it live in those woods? How many of them are there? Do they watch us? Every time I hear about missing hikers or strange sounds in the forest, I wonder. I've become that guy who believes in Bigfoot. If you told me 15 years ago that I'd be writing this, I would have thought you were crazy. But that night changed everything for me. It showed me that there are things in this world we don't understand. Things that exist, whether we want to believe in them or not. Sometimes I think about trying to find it again, setting up cameras or something. But then I remember that sound, that howl that seemed to come from something ancient and powerful. And I decide that maybe some things are better left alone. Maybe we're not supposed to know everything that shares this world with us. All I know for sure is what I saw that night was real. It was massive, it was intelligent enough to hide, and it was scared enough of us to run away. But what haunts me most is wondering, what if next time it doesn't run? Story 14. I still can't believe I'm finally writing this down. For over 30 years, I've kept these experiences mostly to myself, only telling a handful of people who either looked at me like I was crazy or nervously laughed it off. But after reading similar accounts online, I realize I'm not alone in what I saw in Blackwater River State Forest. It all started in the summer of 1990 when I was 14. My best friend Jake and I were obsessed with our dirt bikes. We'd spend almost every weekend exploring the trails around Milton, Florida, where we lived. That July day was brutally hot, the kind of Florida heat that makes the air feel like soup. We decided to check out a new section of Blackwater Forest that we hadn't fully explored yet, the The locals called one spot the Sulphur Hole, a weird clearing surrounded by scrub pines and palmetto bushes where the ground stayed perpetually damp and smelled like rotten eggs. We'd heard about it, but never been there. Jake had directions from his older brother, who used to hunt in that area. We'd been riding for about 2 hours when we found it. The trail dipped down into this bowl-shaped depression, and immediately I could smell that distinct sulfur odor. The ground was much soggier than we expected. Jake went in first, and his back tire immediately sank about 6 inches into the muck. I foolishly followed, thinking I could power through it, and got stuck worse than he did. "Dude, we're screwed," Jake said, trying to rock his bike free. We were both sweating like crazy, our boots covered in black mud as we tried to free our bikes. It was probably around 2 in the afternoon, and even though we were under tree cover, the heat was unbearable. That's when I felt it, that weird sensation of being watched. I can't explain it, but it was like my brain suddenly flipped a switch, and all my attention shifted to the ridge about 50 yards away that encircled part of the clearing. "Hey, did you see that?" I asked Jake, freezing in place. "See what?" "I don't know. Something moved up there on the ridge." We both stared at the tree line, nothing for about 30 seconds, and I started to think it was just a deer or maybe my imagination. Then we both saw it at the same time. A massive dark figure emerged from behind a cluster of pines on the ridge. It was walking upright, but not like a human walks. It had this weird swagger, with arms that hung much lower than any person should. The thing was huge. I'd guess 7 or 8 feet tall, but it's hard to be exact at that distance. "What the hell is that?" Jake whispered. We both instinctively crouched lower. The creature was covered in dark hair, not fur exactly, but long, matted hair that was almost black. From that distance, I couldn't make out its face clearly, but its head seemed to sit directly on its shoulders without much of a neck. It moved with purpose, not rushing, just deliberately walking along the ridgeline. Then it stopped behind a large pine tree, not completely hidden. We could still see part of its shoulder and arm, but it was clearly watching us. I remember my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My mouth went completely dry. "Is that, a Bigfoot?" Jake whispered, his voice cracking. I couldn't even answer. Growing up in rural Florida, I'd heard the stories. Everyone had some cousin or uncle who claimed to have seen something in the woods, but I always thought they were just campfire stories. We stood frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. Neither of us wanted to make sudden movements. The creature didn't move either, just watched us from its partial hiding spot behind the tree. "We need to get our bikes out," I finally whispered, slowly. For the next 45 minutes to an hour, we worked on freeing our dirt bikes, constantly glancing up at the ridge. The creature stayed there the entire time, occasionally shifting position, but never fully revealing itself again. The whole time, I felt like I was going to throw up from fear. We finally got the bikes free and walked them, didn't even start the engines, until we were about a quarter-mile away. Only then did we kickstart them and ride like hell out of there. When we looked back, the creature was gone. Jake and I talked about it non-stop for weeks, swearing each other to secrecy because we knew no one would believe us. We even made up a different story about getting stuck in mud to tell our parents why we came home so late and filthy. I thought that would be the end of it. One freaky encounter that would eventually fade into a weird memory. But the following summer, 1991, I went back. I know that sounds insane, but curiosity is a powerful thing when you're 15. This time I brought my girlfriend, Melissa. I didn't tell her about what happened with Jake, just said I wanted to show her this cool spot in the forest. We parked our bikes at the main trail entrance and walked in. I didn't want to risk getting stuck again, and honestly, I was hoping to prove to myself that what Jake and I had seen was just some weird trick of light, or maybe a bear standing unusually. The sulfur hole looked completely different in early June. It was drier, with more vegetation growing in the clearing. We walked around the perimeter, staying on higher ground. Melissa was complaining about the smell and the mosquitoes, and I was starting to feel stupid for coming back. Then we heard it, brush moving about 30 yards into the tree line, in roughly the same area where we'd seen the creature the year before. I froze, and Melissa asked what was wrong. Before I could answer, there was a deep grunt, followed by this low, rattling growl that made the hair on my arms stand up. It didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, not a bear, not a wild hog, nothing native to those woods that I knew of. Melissa heard it too and grabbed my arm. "What was that?" she whispered. I didn't answer, just took her hand and said, "We need to go, now." We walked quickly back to our bikes, and the whole time I could hear movement paralleling us in the woods, just out of sight. Melissa was on the verge of tears by the time we reached the bikes, and I felt like a complete idiot for bringing her there. I avoided the area for the next 3 years. Jake moved away, and I gradually convinced myself that maybe we'd exaggerated what we saw. Maybe it had been a bear. Maybe the second time was just a wild hog. The mind has a way of normalizing the impossible. Until the summer after my senior year, 1994. I was 18 then, about to leave for college in the fall. I decided to take one last long ride through all my favorite trails in Blackwater. Stupid nostalgia. Even stupider was my decision to revisit the sulfur hole one last time, alone. The area had changed. Logging operations had cleared sections of forest nearby, and the trails were wider from increased ATV traffic. I felt safer somehow, like the encroachment of human activity would have driven away anything unusual. I parked my bike at the edge of the clearing, switched off the engine, and just sat there, looking across the now familiar depression. It was early evening, maybe around 7, but in June it was still bright daylight. Birds were singing, cicadas buzzing, completely normal forest sounds. I took off my helmet, hung it on the handlebar, and was about to walk down to the edge of the sulfur hole when I heard brush snapping on the ridge. Loud, deliberate snaps, like something large was moving quickly through the underbrush. Then I heard a bark, not like a dog, more like a sharp, explosive vocalization. Before I could even process what was happening, I saw it charging down the ridge toward me. It was the same creature, unmistakably, but this time I could see it clearly. 7 feet tall at minimum, with massively broad shoulders and a barrel chest. Dark, almost black hair covered its body, but thinner on its face, which looked like a nightmarish blend of human and ape features. It was running upright, arms bent at the elbows, moving with incredible speed for something so large, and it was angry. Its mouth was open, showing wide, flat teeth. The sound it made as it ran toward me, a combination of grunts and that rattling growl, is something I'll never forget. I couldn't move. My legs literally wouldn't respond. I just stood there, one hand still on my bike, watching this impossible creature charge straight at me. It stopped about halfway down the slope, maybe 30 yards away, close enough that I could smell it. A powerful, musky odor mixed with something rotten. It growled again, lower this time, and beat its open hand against a tree trunk, making a thudding sound that seemed to reverberate through the clearing. I don't know how long we stared at each other. 10 seconds, 30, it felt like hours. Its eyes were dark and deeply set, unquestionably intelligent and filled with what I can only describe as territorial rage. Finally, my survival instinct kicked in. Without taking my eyes off the creature, I slowly reached for my helmet. As I moved, it took one step forward and made that barking sound again. I froze. We stayed like that, locked in this standoff, until the creature suddenly tilted its head, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then it turned and moved back up the ridge, not running but walking deliberately, occasionally looking back over its shoulder at me. The moment it disappeared into the tree line, I jammed my helmet on, started my bike, and rode out of there faster than I've ever ridden in my life. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road, and I didn't stop shaking until I was home. I never went back to that part of Blackwater Forest again. Never told my parents. Tried to tell a couple of friends in college who just thought I was making up stories while drunk. Eventually, I stopped talking about it altogether. I'm 30-something now with kids of my own. We live several states away from Florida, and I've never taken them back to those woods. Sometimes I wonder if that area has been fully developed now, if that creature has been pushed deeper into the shrinking wilderness, or if it's even still alive. All I know is what I saw was real. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a suit, and that look in its eyes, that intelligence and rage, still haunts my dreams sometimes. Whatever it was, it knew exactly what it was doing when it charged at me, when it stopped, when it warned me away from its territory. I know what I saw. It was a Bigfoot, and it wanted me gone. Story 15. I've been hunting deer in Blackthorn County for over 15 years now. I know these woods like the back of my hand. Every trail, every clearing, every good spot where the bucks tend to cross. I'm not one for tall tales or ghost stories. Ask anyone who knows me, and they'll tell you James Thompson is about as straightforward as they come. That's why what happened last fall has been eating at me for months. It was early November. One of those perfect hunting evenings, temperature around 50 degrees, light breeze, clear skies. I'd been up in my tree stand since about 2 in the afternoon, positioned about 18 feet up an old oak that gives me a good view of 3 game trails that converge near a small creek. I'd seen a few does earlier, but nothing I wanted to take, so I was just enjoying the quiet time in nature, something I've always appreciated about hunting. Around sundown, must have been about 5:30, I decided to pack it in. No trophy buck today, but that's how it goes sometimes. I secured my shotgun, a Remington 12 gauge I've had for years, and carefully climbed down. My truck was parked about 3/4 of a mile away, down a winding trail I've walked hundreds of times. I remember checking my phone, no service as usual in that part of the woods, and sliding it back into my pocket. I'd promised my wife I'd pick up something for dinner on the way home if I didn't bag anything. Just a normal day, normal thoughts. That's when I first noticed it. The silence. If you spend time in the woods, you know they're never actually quiet. There's always something. Birds calling, squirrels rustling, leaves moving in the breeze, distant branches creaking. But suddenly, there was nothing. Absolute silence that hit me like a physical thing. I stopped walking and just listened for a moment. No wind, no birds, no insects, nothing. The hair on my arms stood up despite my heavy flannel shirt. Something felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I remember thinking maybe a storm was coming, though the sky had been clear. Animals go quiet before bad weather sometimes, but this was different. This was complete. I picked up my pace a bit, following the familiar trail around a massive deadfall, an old oak that had come down in a storm 2 seasons back. The county maintenance folks had cleared enough of it to keep the path walkable, but the bulk of the tree still lay there, creating a natural barrier about 5 feet high you had to walk around. As I rounded that deadfall, I saw it. About 40 feet ahead of me on the trail stood something. I'm 6'1", and this thing towered over what I'd guessed to be at least 8 feet tall. Broad shoulders, massive build, standing completely upright on 2 legs. My first thought, ridiculous as it sounds now, was that it was another hunter in some kind of ghillie suit. But no, the proportions were all wrong. The shoulders too wide, the arms too long, the stance too inhuman. It was just standing there, completely still, except for the slow rise and fall of its massive chest. I could see its breath in the cooling evening air, these little puffs of vapor that somehow made it more real, more terrifying. The light was fading fast, but I could make out its silhouette clearly against the lighter background of the path behind it. The thing that really struck me was how it was acting. It seemed to be actively scenting the air. Its head was slightly raised, and though I couldn't make out facial details in the dimming light, I could tell it was systematically searching for something, for scents. My scent, maybe. I stood frozen. My shotgun was slung over my shoulder, loaded with deer slugs. I could have reached for it. Should have, maybe. But something deep and instinctive told me not to. Not to move, not to threaten, not to run. Then it turned its head and looked directly at me. I've been face to face with black bears 3 times in my life. I've had a bull moose charge within 15 feet of me up in Maine. I've even had a mountain lion cross my path once in Colorado, but I've never felt what I felt in that moment. Time seemed to stop. My chest tightened so much I couldn't breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. We just stared at each other. Couldn't have been more than 5 or 6 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. I started backing away slowly. No sudden movements, just one small step backwards, then another. My mind was racing with everything I'd ever learned about predators. Don't run. Don't turn your back. Don't show fear. But man, I was terrified. The creature, and I don't know what else to call it, took 2 deliberate steps toward me, not charging, not aggressive, just purposeful. My hand instinctively moved toward my shotgun, but I still didn't grab it. Something told me that would be a mistake. After those 2 steps, it suddenly changed direction, veering off the path and into the woods to my right. What struck me most was how it moved. Something that size should have crashed through the underbrush like a bulldozer. But it didn't. There was just the soft snap of twigs, the gentle brushing of branches. For something so massive, it moved with unbelievable silence. I stood there for what must have been 5 minutes, just listening, making sure it was gone. When I finally convinced myself to move again, I didn't walk. I ran, full sprint back the way I'd come, away from my truck, away from the direction the creature had gone. I took a much longer route back to the access road, adding probably 2 miles to my journey, but I wasn't taking any chances. By the time I reached my truck, I was drenched in sweat, despite the cool evening air. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice before managing to unlock the door. I threw my gear in the back and got the hell out of there. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my wife, not my hunting buddies, nobody. What was I supposed to say? That I saw Bigfoot? That would go over real well at the Thursday night poker game. The next day, I went back, daylight, shotgun loaded, and this time I brought my .45 sidearm too. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I'd seen a bear standing on its hind legs, or maybe some weird shadow play in the fading light. I went straight to the spot where I'd seen it. The ground was hard. We hadn't had rain in weeks. But I searched anyway, looking for tracks, broken branches, anything. I found nothing conclusive. A few broken twigs here and there, but nothing that couldn't have been caused by deer or other normal forest inhabitants. Later that day, I casually asked the property owner, Bill Peterson, if he'd ever seen anything strange in those woods. Bill's family has owned that land for generations. If anyone would know about anything unusual, it would be him. Strange how? He'd asked, eyeing me over his coffee mug. I don't know, I shrugged, trying to sound casual. Unusual animals, maybe. Anything out of the ordinary. Bill just shook his head. Nope, just the usual deer, turkey, occasional bear. Then he changed the subject to the weather forecast for the coming week, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something, like he knew exactly what I was asking but wasn't about to discuss it. That was almost 4 months ago. I've been back to those woods a dozen times since then, always in daylight, always armed, always hyper-aware of my surroundings. I haven't seen it again, but I can't shake the feeling that it's out there, watching, waiting. The thing is, I'm not some conspiracy theorist or paranormal enthusiast. I'm just a regular guy who likes to hunt deer and spend time outdoors. I've never believed in Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. Even now, I catch myself trying to rationalize what I saw. Maybe it was just a bear. Maybe it was exhaustion playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know it was real. And the question that keeps me up at night isn't what it was. It's why it let me go, why it didn't come after me when it so easily could have. I've kept this to myself for too long. My wife has noticed something's off, says I don't sleep well anymore, that I jerk awake at the slightest sound outside our bedroom window. She thinks it's work stress. I let her believe that. I'm sharing this now because I need to tell someone. I need to know if anyone else has seen something similar in Blackthorn County. I need to know I'm not losing my mind. One thing's for certain, I don't hunt alone anymore, and I'm always out of those woods well before sunset. Whatever's in there, whatever I saw that evening, it owns the night, and I'm not about to dispute that claim. Story 16. It was a Thursday evening around 9:30. Emma and I were in bed reading. She was into some mystery novel, and I was flipping through a hunting magazine. The windows were open to catch the summer breeze. Our two dogs, Cooper, a German Shepherd mix, and Bailey, a beagle, hound something or other, were sleeping at the foot of the bed. Everything was normal, peaceful, the way it should be. Then we heard it. At first I thought I was imagining things. It was a scream, but not like an animal. It sounded like a woman, and she sounded like she was in serious trouble. Emma heard it too. She put down her book and looked at me with wide eyes. "Jack, what was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, already getting out of bed. "Maybe someone's hurt." The scream came again, louder this time. It was this high-pitched wail that seemed to cut through the trees and straight into my chest. It made the hair on my arms stand up. Cooper and Bailey went absolutely nuts, barking and running to the front door. Bailey was howling now, which she never did. The scream came a third time, and I swear it was closer, even louder. It didn't sound quite right, but I couldn't put my finger on why. All I knew was that someone might need help, and I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy mag lights that could double as a weapon if needed, and my phone. "I'm going to check it out," I told Emma. "You stay here with the dogs. Keep your phone handy and call 911 if you hear anything strange." Emma nodded, but I could tell she was scared. "Please be careful, Jack. Something doesn't feel right about this." I pulled on my boots and stepped outside. The night was warm but not hot, typical for July in Pennsylvania. The moon was nearly full, casting weird shadows across our clearing. I clicked on my flashlight and headed toward where I thought the screams had come from. Our trailer sat in the middle of a clearing about 200 feet across. Beyond that was dense forest. I'd hunted these woods plenty of times and knew them well, but they looked different at night. More alive, more watchful. I made it to the edge of the clearing, maybe 100 feet from our trailer. The dogs were still barking like crazy back inside. I swept my flashlight across the tree line, seeing nothing unusual, but then I heard movement, branches snapping, leaves rustling. Something big was moving out there. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? Do you need help?" No response, just more movement. I stepped closer to the tree line and shined my light directly into the woods. That's when I saw them. Two reddish-orange eyes reflecting my flashlight beam. They were at least 7 feet off the ground, too high for a deer, too high for a person, unless they were unusually tall and standing on something. My heart started hammering in my chest. Those eyes didn't blink. They just stared back at me, unmoving. I could barely make out a large, dark shape behind a tree, but the details were lost in the shadows. "Who's there?" I called again, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. The eyes disappeared. Then I heard more movement, heavy and fast. Whatever it was running away, but it wasn't running on 4 legs like a bear or deer. The footfalls were heavy, but spaced like a person running. It was moving upright on 2 legs. I didn't go any further into the woods. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get back to the trailer, back to Emma. I practically ran back, looking over my shoulder the whole time. When I got inside, Emma was standing by the window, holding Bailey, while Cooper continued to bark at the door. "What did you see?" she asked, her face pale in the dim light. "I'm not sure," I said. not wanting to freak her out more. But it was big, really big, and it had these eyes. We didn't sleep much that night. The dogs finally calmed down around midnight, but Emma and I kept listening for more screams. They didn't come, but we both felt like something was out there watching our trailer. The next morning I went out to look for tracks. I found some broken branches and what might have been footprints in a muddy patch, but they were smudged and unclear. Whatever had been out there was gone now, at least that's what we thought. But it came back. Over the next couple of weeks, strange things kept happening. 5 days after the first incident, we were watching TV around 8 in the evening when something hit the side of our trailer, not like a branch blown by the wind. This was deliberate, like someone had slammed their fist into the metal siding. It hit with enough force to shake the whole wall. Both of us jumped up and the dogs went ballistic again. I grabbed my flashlight and a baseball bat this time and went outside, but saw nothing. Emma swore she heard heavy footsteps running away, but by the time I got out there, whatever it was had vanished. 3 nights later, we were in bed when we heard deep, heavy breathing outside our bedroom window. Our trailer was set up on blocks, so the windows were maybe 4 feet off the ground. The breathing sounded like it was right at window level. Cooper started growling, low and threatening. I slowly reached for the flashlight on my nightstand. Emma clutched my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. The breathing continued, slow, heavy, like something huge was trying to be quiet but couldn't quite manage it. I flicked on the flashlight and aimed it at the window in one quick motion. For a split second, just a fraction of a moment, I saw a face looking in at us. It wasn't human. It was large, with a wide, dark face and deep-set eyes that caught the light. The nose was flat and broad. I caught just a glimpse before it pulled away, but that glimpse was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. Emma saw it too. She screamed, and the face disappeared. We heard heavy running footsteps outside, shaking the ground as whatever it was fled. "Jack, what the hell was that?" Emma was trembling beside me. "That wasn't a person." I couldn't answer her. I didn't have words for what I'd just seen. It looked almost like a gorilla, but we don't have gorillas in Pennsylvania, and it was standing upright, tall enough to look in our window without stretching. The next day, I called the local police and reported it as a possible prowler. The deputy who came out looked around but found nothing conclusive. He suggested it might be teenagers playing pranks, or maybe a bear, though he admitted bears don't usually peer into windows. He clearly didn't believe us when we tried to describe what we'd seen. Over the next 2 weeks, the visits continued. We'd hear knocking sounds from the woods, not random tree noises, but deliberate patterns, like someone tapping on tree trunks. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks, over and over. Sometimes at dusk, we'd see movement at the edge of the clearing, something large moving between trees, always staying just out of clear sight. The dogs refused to go outside after dark anymore. Bailey would tremble and hide under the bed if we tried to take her out. One morning, I found our trash can tipped over and garbage strewn around, not scattered like raccoons would do, but sorted. Food wrappers were in one pile, paper in another, plastic in a third, like someone was curious about what we threw away. The most terrifying night came in early August. We were sleeping with the windows closed despite the heat, because we were too scared to leave them open anymore. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps circling our trailer, slow, deliberate steps that made the ground vibrate. Cooper was standing at attention, staring at the wall, his hackles raised. Bailey was under the bed, whimpering. The footsteps stopped right outside our bedroom. Then came the smell, a powerful, musky odor that somehow penetrated through the closed window. It smelled wild, like wet fur and dirt and something else I can't describe. Then it touched the trailer. I don't know with what, a hand, a paw, but it ran something down the metal siding from the roof to the ground. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, but deeper, more powerful. Emma woke up and clutched me, both of us frozen in fear. Next came the breathing again, heavy and rhythmic. And then, I'll never forget this as long as I live, it spoke. At least it made sounds that seemed like speech, low, rumbling vocalizations that rose and fell like someone talking. Not English, not any language I recognized, but definitely patterned sounds. Deliberate, intelligent. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. The footsteps moved away, and we heard crashing through the underbrush as it returned to the forest. The next morning, I found 5 long scratches down the side of our trailer, spaced about 4 inches apart. They were deep enough to gouge the metal. The visits stopped as suddenly as they began. By mid-August, whatever had been stalking our property was gone. No more screams, no more knocking, no more face at the window. The dogs gradually returned to their normal behavior, but Emma and I never felt safe there again. We moved out in September, breaking our lease and losing our security deposit. We didn't care. No amount of money was worth living in constant fear. I've spent years researching what happened to us. I've read accounts of similar experiences. I've looked at blurry photos and watched questionable videos. I've spoken to other people who claim to have seen something in those woods. I don't use the word Bigfoot lightly. It comes with connotations of hoaxes and ridicule. But I know what I saw. I know what we experienced. Something intelligent was watching us. Something that walked upright but wasn't human. Something curious about how we lived. It's been 15 years, and I still wake up sometimes thinking I hear those heavy footsteps circling our house. I still check the windows at night, half expecting to see that face looking in at me. And sometimes, when I'm driving through rural areas at dusk, I scan the tree line, wondering if there are eyes watching me from the shadows. I don't go camping anymore. I don't hike in dense forests, and I will never ever investigate strange screams in the woods at night. Some questions are better left unanswered. Story 17. I still get chills thinking about what I saw that morning. I've gone back and forth about posting this for months now, but I need to get it off my chest. I'm not looking for attention or trying to convince anyone of anything. I just need to tell someone who might understand, because my wife thinks I need to see a therapist, and my buddies at work just laugh it off. It was August 25th of this year, a Sunday morning. I remember because I had to make a run to O'Reilly's in Fort Valley to pick up a new fuel filter for my Duramax. The check engine light had come on the night before, and I'd hooked up my diagnostic scanner which pointed to the fuel system. I figured I'd get an early start before the Georgia heat kicked in. I left my house around 8:30 in the morning. The sky was clear, and the sun was already warming things up. I've lived in this area my whole life, so I know Highway 96 like the back of my hand. It's a 2-lane road cutting through mostly pine forests and farmland between Perry and Fort Valley. Not much traffic on a Sunday morning, which was fine by me. I had the windows down, enjoying the morning air and listening to some old Lynyrd Skynyrd on the radio. Nothing unusual about the drive. I was probably doing about 60 miles per hour, just cruising along. About halfway to Fort Valley, there's this stretch where the road crests over a small hill. Nothing dramatic, just enough of a rise that you can't see what's on the other side until you're right at the top. As I came over that hill, that's when it happened. Something, and I still struggle with what to call it, was crossing the road maybe 50 yards ahead of me. My first thought was that it was a person, because it was upright and dark-colored. But within a split second I knew that wasn't right. No person moves like that. This thing was moving. Not just jogging across the road, but covering ground in a way that seemed impossible. It had this weird running style, with its arms stretched out straight instead of bent at the elbows, like you or I would run. The stride was all wrong too, way too long. It cleared both lanes in what looked like 3 or 4 steps max. I instinctively hit the brakes, not hard enough to skid, but enough that I slowed down considerably. The thing had already disappeared into the tree line on the left side of the road by the time I got to where it had crossed. It had come from the right side, crossed in front of me, and vanished into the woods on the left. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 3 seconds, but I saw it clear as day. It was definitely bigger than me, And I'm 6 feet even and about 200 pounds. This thing had to be at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. The color was dark brown or black. It was hard to tell in that quick glimpse, but definitely not a light color. I pulled over to the shoulder right where it had crossed and sat there for a minute, trying to process what I'd just seen. My heart was racing, and I had this weird feeling in my stomach, like when you narrowly avoid a car accident. I rolled up my windows and locked the doors without even thinking about it. I got out my phone and checked the time, 8:59. I immediately called my wife. She could tell something was wrong from my voice. "Lisa, you're not going to believe what I just saw," I said. I was struggling to keep my voice steady. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" she asked. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but even as the words were coming out of my mouth, I knew how crazy it sounded. Something crossed the road in front of me. It wasn't a deer or a bear. It was walking upright. But it wasn't a person. There was a long silence on the other end. "David, are you serious right now?" "I know how it sounds," I said. "But I swear to God, this wasn't normal. The way it moved, nothing moves like that." "Maybe it was just someone out jogging," she suggested, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "Lisa, no human being can move like that. The speed, the way it ran, it wasn't natural." She tried to calm me down, told me to just continue to the store and we'd talk about it when I got home. I hung up and sat there for another minute or two, scanning the tree line where the thing had disappeared. There was no movement, no sound, other than the normal forest noises and the occasional car passing by. I was shaking a little as I put the truck back in drive and continued toward Fort Valley. My mind was racing, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a really tall person in dark clothes, but the movement, that's what I couldn't get past. The fluid, powerful way it crossed the road was unlike anything I'd ever seen a human do. When I got to O'Reilly's, I was still so distracted that I almost walked out without paying for the fuel filter. The cashier had to call me back. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost because he asked if I was feeling all right. I just mumbled something about not getting enough sleep and got out of there. Instead of heading straight home, I decided to drive back to the spot where I'd seen the thing. I don't know what I expected to find. Footprints on the asphalt, some kind of evidence. I drove slowly past the area, scanning both sides of the road. Nothing looked out of place. The woods were just woods, thick with pine trees and underbrush. I turned around and drove past the spot again, and then one more time. 4 passes total, each time driving slower, looking for any sign of whatever I'd seen. But there was nothing. On the final pass, I pulled over again, right where I'd seen it cross. I sat there for a good 20 minutes, just watching and listening. Part of me wanted to get out and look for tracks in the woods, but another part, a stronger part, was terrified of what I might find, or what might find me. The whole time I sat there, I kept replaying those few seconds in my mind. The dark figure emerging from the right side of the road, the incredible, impossible speed, the way its arms were extended straight out instead of pumping like a normal runner, the fluid motion as it disappeared into the trees on the left. It was like watching an Olympic sprinter, except this thing was much larger and moved in a way that seemed to defy physics. I've been hunting these woods my whole life. I know what bears look like when they run. I know what deer look like. Hell, I even know what people look like when they're trying to cross a highway in a hurry. This wasn't any of those things. When I finally got home, Lisa took one look at me and knew something was seriously wrong. I tried explaining it again, this time with more detail, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. She didn't say I was crazy, but she didn't have to. "Maybe you should talk to someone about this," she suggested carefully. "You've been working so hard lately, and stress can do weird things to your perception." That stung, but I couldn't really blame her. If she'd told me a similar story, I'd probably have the same reaction. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I started researching online, looking at videos of different animals running, trying to find anything that matched what I'd witnessed. Nothing came close. Then I started looking up other things, Bigfoot sightings, unexplained creatures. I'd never given much thought to that stuff before, always figured it was just stories people made up for attention. But now, I wasn't so sure anymore. I found a few accounts from people who claimed to have seen similar things in Georgia. Some of the descriptions matched what I saw: the height, the speed, the unusual running style with outstretched arms. Reading those accounts sent chills down my spine. These people, whoever they were, had seen the same thing I had. I've gone back to that stretch of Highway 96 probably a dozen times since then, different times of day, different days of the week. I've never seen anything like it again. Part of me is relieved, but another part almost wishes I would, just so I could confirm I wasn't imagining things. I've told a few close friends about what happened. Most of them laugh it off or suggest I'd been drinking, which I absolutely hadn't been. One buddy, Mike, seemed to take me more seriously. He didn't say much, just nodded and said his grandfather had once told him a similar story about something he'd seen near the Ocmulgee River back in the 70s. It's been over 3 months now, and I still think about it almost every day. When I drive that stretch of highway, my hands get sweaty on the steering wheel, and I find myself scanning the tree line constantly. I've started keeping a dash cam running in my truck, hoping that if it ever happens again, I'll have proof. The rational part of my brain keeps trying to explain it away. Maybe it was just a trick of the light. Maybe it was someone on a dirt bike, though I never heard an engine. Maybe I dozed off for a second and dreamed the whole thing, though I know I was wide awake. But deep down, I know what I saw. It was real. It was there. And it wasn't something that's supposed to exist in our world. Whatever crossed Highway 96 that August morning wasn't human. And the thought that it's still out there, moving through those Georgia woods with that impossible speed and grace, keeps me up at night more often than I'd like to admit. I don't know what it was. I don't know if I'll ever see it again. But I know what I saw, and nothing anyone says will convince me otherwise. Something crossed that road in front of me that day, something that shouldn't exist, and my world hasn't felt quite the same since.